Okay. So let's go ahead and begin. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Monterey Bay Community Power Community Advisory Committee. We are here at the main offices on Thursday, April 18th at 6 p.m. And I think we begin with a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Community Advisory Council Member Dr. Bueno de Bosque.
Present.
Hartman.
Yes.
Osmer.
Here.
Wolfram.
Here.
Amasquita.
Here.
Stedman.
Here.
Groot.
Yes.
Bezero Wist.
Here.
Capron.
Here.
Vice Chair Levon is absent, and Chair Byron.
Present. Thank you. Mr. Groot, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, thank you very much. Before we really get started, I'd like to turn to Ms. Lair and ask if she'd explain some changes that have taken place with regard to making our meetings more accessible.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as many of you know, we are now video streaming live. So our meeting, so you have to be on your best behavior. But yeah, it does provide a lot more transparency, and so it's a fun and exciting new change.
Good.
And board meetings will be as well.
And who's responsible for this technological breakthrough?
Well, Tom gave me the authorizations.
All right, well, whoever's accomplished it, thank you very much, Ms. Lair.
You're very welcome.
And as far as I can tell, everybody's behavior has been exemplary, so I don't think you have to worry. But do know that the microphones are always on when we're live streaming. So even when you pull back from the chair, your voices can probably still be heard.
I just wanted to mention that in the email that Brent sent out to us, I thought it was really great that you're also going to be able to go to past meetings and just click in the agenda, and it'll take you to that part of the video from a previous meeting. So people in the public who are wanting to follow up on specific issues will have a really time finding those.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. That was a great thing to include in this technology. Very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Well, we have accolades before we've even started. Let's see. Public comments on matters not listed on the agenda. If there's anyone here that would like to address the council, please come forward. But before you do, please come forward. But before you begin, let me just ask council here. Mr. Shaw, we received some documents beforehand, and I just want to make sure we're all clear in understanding how we're supposed to handle stuff that we received beforehand. There was a request in that. What do you recommend I mean, we can read them for information, but unless that individual is present at the meeting, how do we handle those kind of comments as they come in?
So those written comments that might be submitted prior to the actual meeting taking place are part of the official record. They're maintained by the clerk of the board. They're printed out and available for members of the public who are here to be able to review, and they're also available. They've been distributed prior to the meeting to all of you. So they're available. It's part of the public comment record, and of course, as part of either the report out or discussion of the comment. Let me limit this. As part of the report outs that the councils can do, if there's a question or some amount of follow-up, it can be addressed then.
Okay. So I have a feeling that topic may come up again, but we'll go ahead and proceed. Oh, Mr. Groot, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want some clarification. If it's not on the agenda, we cannot take action. Is that correct?
We won't take action or discuss it, but in terms of the submitted public comment, if there's a question for staff related to it, it could come up as part of the board reports, which are agenda as item 12 on tonight's agenda, the CAC members' reports and comments.
Oh, so that's when we should be discussing those, perhaps.
Not discussing, but if there's a question for staff related to a public comment that was provided earlier, we can address it then.
So I try to keep my question to you in general terms. There are suggestions, however, that do come forward periodically that we look at as to potentially put on the agenda and we will continue to do that in the future. But there's a process that we got to go through and make sure we're covering the bases there. But how do we keep this so, I want to keep it general, but I want to let the council know that if there are topics that you want to see agendized, please let me know, okay? All right, thank you. Sir, thanks for your patience.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to be talking about what you were just talking about.
Oh, go right ahead. You're free to. You're
Okay.
free to.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, staff, and Tom. Presently, a great workshop on the 30th. Really enjoyed it. Everyone did such a great job. I'm actually here to fill in for the Santa Cruz Downtown Commissioner Brett Garrett, who I think you have the information in front of you. And I'm also in support of Assembly Bill 857 for public banking. And briefly, for the people out here, public banks offer a way for governmental agencies such as cities, counties, and states to invest their funds in an institution that could allow investing organizations to avoid high financial costs. Number two, public banks also generate income for their investments that can be reinvested in public benefit projects. Example, affordable housing, public transportation, and social programs. And the third benefit down here, to provide cost-saving services to public utilities and to serve local needs, including, again, affordable housing, transportation, educational, investment adhering to principles of economic, racial, and environmental justice. Brett has been up to Sacramento in support of this AB 857. He's busy this evening, or he would be here doing this. Also, this has been passed by the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors with a 4-to-1 vote. And at that time, there was no AB 857. So if you decide as a group to support this or endorse it, that would have to be included in the resolution also. Also, April 18th is important, basically because there's a Assembly Banking and Finance Committee on April 22nd looking at this, and then the Local Governments Committee on April 24th. I know this kind of came up late. That's probably not going to be easy to endorse in that short a period of time, but it could be maybe agendized at some future date. And again, a question to everyone here, as well as Tom and staff: what is the process to get this possibly onto agendas to maybe endorse it? That's my last. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? All right. Thank you. Item 3, Ms. Lair, any corrections or additions to the agenda? Okay, agenda as written. And item 4 is that we have a presentation from the, well, we always say the acronym, MBARD, Monterey Bay Air Resources District, from the Air Quality Planner, Mr. Alan Romero, on school bus electrification program. So as you're coming up, I have a question for Mr. Habashi. Would you explain to the council how this item got on the agenda, if you know?
Good question. My staff asked me to put it on the agenda, so I did.
Okay, we welcome the information. You know, I'm not suggesting otherwise. I just wonder how it got there, and I'm glad to have it.
It's an honor to have Alan here on behalf of MBARD. I think it's just part of our opportunity to bring forth innovative programs and opportunities that other agencies are doing, like we did with the transit agencies, specifically because transportation electrification is such an integral part of us transforming this region. So case in point, we reached out to MBARD, and they were gracious enough to come here tonight.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, and glad you're with us.
Chairman Byron, thank you, and members of the committee, Mr. Habashi, JR. A pleasure to be here and present to you. We've been collaborating with Monterey Community Power now for several months on a number of wonderful, exciting, challenging programs. One of the things that we talked about is what's happening in the transportation space, specifically the school bus fleets. Start this with a little bit of background. We source our funding for either improve the, let me back up a little bit. Back in 2009, there was a Proposition 1B that was before the state of California, where these bond revenues, were used by the Air Resources Board to administer enhancing the diesel fleets by installing exhaust DPF, diesel particulate filters, and then replacing older polluting buses. That was about a $7.3 million endeavor to our district. We replaced about a little over 50 school buses with new buses, and we retrofitted over 170 school buses with level 3 diesel particulate filters. Again, $7.3 million on diesel technology. So in 2014, when the heavy-duty truck and bus regulation kicked in, at that point in time, a reasonable assumption was made that all of the school bus fleets were compliant to the regulation, which was based on diesel emissions. That said, local funding that we collect from the DMV in the form of a $2 fee, we call it the AB 923 fund, allows us to take that money and either use it to replace buses with electrification or other alternative fuels. We prefer electrification because we have embraced a pretty strong mantra that the real path to zero emission is through electrification. So we started the ZESB program, Zero Emission School Bus Program, and we started it in December of last year. And we outreached to the schools and said, hey, if you'd like to apply for an electric bus, we'll be happy to give you one. But obviously this money just doesn't, I hate to say this, but it doesn't grow on trees. But the funding is there, it's solid, and we really think that this program deserves a lot of attention. And so one of the things that we've done with JR and his team is to talk about leveraging along the way as the years progress. We're not going to electrify the fleets in a day or a year or a couple of years. So just to give you an idea, so you do the math there are well over 300 school buses within the 3 counties. And they're all burning diesel, and they're all getting old. So we really need to think about how do we help them electrify their fleets. So we came up with this ZESB, and we went to our board. The board said, yes, sounds exciting, go for it. One of the key elements of this program is the ARB funding source, which the acronym is HVIP, and it's a really long, I'll bore you with it, Hybrid and Zero Emission and Truck and School Bus Vehicle Incentive Project, HVIP. And it's a lot of money that comes into that via AB 118, cap and trade dollars, low carbon fuel standard dollars that come into the program every year. It's continuously funded. And for the longest time, ARB had a real problem getting these funds out to the fleet users. And one of the biggest reasons why is because there just wasn't anything in the marketplace that could sustain spending that money. In other words, there were no electric buses. There were no electric medium to heavy duty trucks on the road. But things have changed in the last 5 years, and we've embraced that. And so when we implemented ZESB, it was pretty a simple process. The most important aspect of this program is infrastructure. And Beth and JR and David and my boss and I have had lengthy discussions about infrastructure. It's one thing to want an electric bus, but you have to know how to charge it. You have to be very mindful of the grid load. If you've got a fleet of 10 buses and you want to park them all overnight, it's not just as easy as plugging in your toaster or your microwave. So EV infrastructure is important. We don't want to just strand an asset by saying, here's your electric bus, how are you going to charge it? That's, you're on your own. So what we do is we ask the applicants to make sure that they've partnered with a third party, IBEW hopefully, contractor to do the work at the site and say, this is what you need to be able to charge this bus. So that's the first step in the process. The next step is the applicant works with the bus vendor to put together their HVIP application. Once that application is received by MBARD, we get a full quote of the bus. We then submit a grant agreement to the school bus, to the school district. The bus is then delivered, paperwork comes to us, and we pick up the tab between the HVIP amount and the cost of the bus. And that typically, on the average, is about $200,000 each side. So HVIP is good for up to 220, and we just cover the rest. So what have we done so far? Well, Santa Rita Union School District was the pioneer. They were the first one to say, yeah, we want this electric bus. This is a Lion Electric C bus, 71 passenger. It was a great media event. Rich was there. It was all kinds of, it was TV, KSBW was there. And it was really exciting for them to embrace this and embark upon doing what they did. So the bus is still rolling. They put solar cells on their school districts, campuses. and they're fat. Well, we'll just say they're just happy. And they're in the queue for, they want more buses than just the one to keep it company. We've also put a bus in Gonzales Unified School District, not necessarily a disadvantaged community, but nonetheless, we certainly don't want to subject anybody, disadvantaged or not, to diesel particulate at 2.5 microns. I think it encourages what we do. We believe in it, and we want to protect the health of the kids. So Gonzales has got the second bus, and I want to let the committee know that these buses are in the queue for award. All of their HVIP certifications are in. There's 9 school districts up there. We have another one, Aroma, San Juan, that just came into the queue. These grants will roll out probably, hopefully, by tomorrow. So we're ready to rock and roll with these buses, and we're really excited about it. So this is just something from the Global Climate Summit last year in San Francisco. I think it really tells the tale. I think you can take the word car out and just say motor vehicles in general. And it's really true. Need I say more? So whether it's smog, respiratory illnesses due to ozone, ground level ozone, or worse than that, the 2.5 micron diesel exhaust, it's just a killer. So what about these electric buses? For a while, school districts were very, very reluctant to embrace them simply because of a lot of myths, but more importantly, the capability of the bus. 5 years ago, when Bluebird came out with their electric bus, it maybe went 50 miles. Maybe. Depends on whether there was grade or whether they needed heating or air conditioning in the bus. But battery technology, as we've all seen, has really gotten exponential. And so the buses that are currently on the market today, depending upon the battery pack that you put on the bus, can easily go 155 miles. Most of the school districts in our 3 counties average about a 60-mile round trip. So it's easy enough to do during the course of the day. You've got a morning run, you've got an afternoon run, everything's cool. Bluebird was one of the first to come to the market. One of the, I won't say tactical risks they took, but what they brought to market was an integrated electric bus. It was a separate chassis, it was a certain frame, it was somebody's motor, it was somebody's battery technology. And so it took them a while to kind of evolve their design processes. And so now they're where Lion is for sure, and where Motive Power is, and where Phoenix Motors are. Lithium-ion NMC technology is the way to go. Low energy density, but they least likely to catch fire or have problems. So it's really a nice technology. Anybody who drives a Tesla or any EV on the road is using NMC technology. One of the things that we like to tell supervisors who are responsible for transportation is that you're looking at fuel savings of up to $16,000 a year. And it's just amazing. That alone usually gets their attention, and the fact that there's lower maintenance. Wheel rotation, brakes, there's not much that goes wrong other than electronics in an electric vehicle. So we try to make that a key point. We've done 2 workshops at our Air District office from 2 different vendors. We've invited all the school districts to attend ride and drive event. Some go well and some don't go so well. So I like this. This is a rather clever and appropriate phrase from Mark Twain. Get your facts first, and then you can do what you want with them. And so these are the kind of questions that we field when we talk to district transportation supervisors, and we do our best with the help of the bus vendors to dispel a lot of the mythology behind it. So one of the things that's really important obviously that makes this program successful is funding. And if you look at what's currently available today, we're fortunate to have HVIP because it's a great, great program. The California Energy Commission just recently put $78 million on the table for school buses specifically, with about 50% of that going to disadvantaged communities. And then you have the CARB VW Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, another $130 million. That's a wide open program, but it's available. And we put at the bottom there Monterey Community Power because we would really welcome an opportunity to put more money on the table to put more electric school buses in the local fleets. Why is this important? Well, this is from the ACT Expo conference in Long Beach last year. It was a pretty high-powered conference, and it shows the commitment of the state of California. So this inverted pyramid speaks to a lot. Governor Brown, one of his last aggressive executive orders was 5 million ZEVs by 2030. That's fleet-wide. That's ambitious. And if you look at the amount of money committed over the next 8 years, at $2.5 billion, and you can see what the breakdown is. Most of that money going to the light-duty fleet. We'd like to see that pyramid be inverted and change and get more money into the medium to heavy-duty fleets. And they're doing their best. At the state level, they're doing their best to do that. And with that, I'd like to entertain any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Romero?
So thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering, with the way bus cycles work for children in the morning and the afternoon, is there an opportunity to charge during the middle of the day rather than overnight?
Yes, but once again, you've got an entity that you all know and love so well, PG&E. The rates, the time of use rates at midday are pretty pricey. So if there's a real need to do that, then go ahead and do it. You might want to probably think about DC fast charge. It's a little bit obviously using more energy, but the time of use is considerably less. And I think PG&E is willing to work with school districts. As a matter of fact, on May 1, they're kicking off their Fleet Ready program, which is supposed to help meet the medium to heavy-duty fleet space with their infrastructure issues. But if you're just doing a 60-mile route, there's really no need to charge in the middle of the day. You come in, you've got a full charge bus, you drive your route, you bring it back to the barn, you go back in the afternoon, you come back, and you still have energy left at 150 miles. So you just plug it in at night.
But Mr. Groot, I think it's a good question because that's going to change.
Yes.
It has to change. The duck curve, which most of the members know about, is going to demand that we change the antiquated rate structure.
Absolutely.
I want to add that we will be happy to work with AMBOT or any other organization, any of the other transportation agencies on crafting rates that will help with dealing with the duck curve, and not only that, but reduces the charge cost during the day when we know we buy the power at wholesale rates throughout the winter and the spring almost at zero cost. We would be happy to kind of work a special rate that will encourage people, whether it's buses, school buses, or transportation buses, to charge during the day instead of waiting until 6 or 7 o'clock at night when the power is actually the most expensive on the wholesale side to charge, because PG&E is charging off-peak rate at that time. And I want to just make one comment. I truly admire what AMBOT is doing. It is something that I've been talking about since I started working here. They already taken a step in going out and electrifying school buses, and we certainly look forward to looking forward with them to do everything that we can do in order to electrify both the building industry and the transportation industry. So there's a lot of synergy between us, and I see it getting better every day.
Is it good leadership that you're attributing that to at MBARD?
Of course, but of course. And actually, the synergy has now gone all the way to me and Richard talking about physically locating the staff of our two agencies together. And by the way, Richard, we did find a spot, so we'll talk about it later.
More questions? Mr. Kaplan?
I just had a quick question. Is the reason for promoting inverting the pyramid because there's more carbon benefits from larger vehicles, or does it have to do also with air quality effects?
Both things, Seth, because when you look at the output of a large diesel motor that's powering a 36,000 pound bus, the emissions coming out of there are just incredible. And the older the engine, the worse that gets. So yes. And you know, the state of California has known this, and so because we're a medium district, we can only collect so much public funding through DMV. But if you look at the large districts like Bay Area, South Coast, and San Joaquin that garner a considerably large chunk of change, they're doling out these great pilot projects that just are immediately focused at the medium to heavy duty fleets. Ports are a big one in both Bay Area and South Coast.
Mr. Osmer?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in the cost to benefit ratio, I guess you'd call it, in terms of electrification of vehicles. Why school buses? So I mean, I understand why when the state you know, sends money that we got to spend it. But at the same time, for the same amount of money, can you accomplish more with you know, medium-duty diesel delivery trucks or more you know, passenger cars or pickup trucks?
That's a great question. So we have several funding sources to do all of those things. We have another local DMV source called AB 2766, where we go out to public fleets, agency fleets, and we ask them, hey, how would you, well, MST is a classic example. They bought a 32-passenger BYD all-electric bus. We funded that. At $500,000 a copy, it gets pretty pricey, and that's why with school buses, the HVIP program is so helpful. But the most important reason about school buses is kids are on it, and they're breathing 2.5. And that really is we're mandated by the Health and Safety Code to protect the public health.
So criteria pollutant PM 2.5.
Yes, yes, sir.
If I may add, that's a really good question. It's actually children are disproportionately exposed because of their lower body weight and higher metabolic rates, so they breathe in more relative to a larger human. It has greater consequences, and it's not so much the PM 2.5. A big component of the particulate matter is diesel particulate, for which the state actually has a cancer potency factor. So just the particulate itself is bad, but when it's diesel, it's all these nooks and crannies that actually a lot of toxics hang on to. So it's a really bad, and it's a good thing to reduce exposure. I should add too that we would like to follow one of our sister agencies at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which is striving for diesel-free by 33, and that's for all fleets, all trucks, buses,
By 2033.
But yeah, 2033. So that's very ambitious, but they've got a lot of resources up there, and hopefully we can tag on. And I echo Tom's comments with regard to we see a lot of potential for joining forces here and making things happen in the public health, clean air, and world of electrons.
Mr. Osmer, were you going somewhere with your question?
You know, I'm just glad that there's a health element to the whole thing that's taken into account as we look at these programs.
Right.
Doctor.
Thank you for your talk. So just granular, how much are these vehicles again, the school buses, and how much are they comparative to the public transit school buses? And are we talking about buying new school buses versus retrofitting? What's the cost differential?
Retrofitting a diesel bus, the regulation dictates what that bus that's rolling today that has your school kids in it has got to be compliant to the 2014 regulation already. So we're not inclined to do anything with diesel technology, whether it's low NOx, doesn't matter. Electrification we feel is really the appropriate path for using local funds. The cost of a school bus, believe it or not, is actually cheaper than a comparable Class 6 truck weighing 36,000 GVWR, about by $200,000. So a school bus typically runs about $400K. A similar truck to do hauling, refuse hauling, for example, at about $250 more, so $650K for that same type of technology, battery capacity, load.
Or were you suggesting retrofitting from diesel to electric in the same vehicle,
If
same
that's
chassis?
possible, I guess. And how much would that cost? And
Well, that's kind of how the electric medium to heavy duty fleet started. They just took chassis, take a Class 6 chassis, tear it apart, get rid of the drivetrain, put motors at each axle, put a battery pack in, put a cover on it, chassis, and then roll it away. The problem with integrating like that is you've got all of these components that are separate. You really want to be careful about how you mix things, like anything else. Sometimes it's not always really a smooth transition to try to shove things into round peg into a square hole. Sometimes that's what was happening. So you're not getting the utilization out of that put together vehicle that you thought you were going to get. And that's what the school buses and the first medium duty trucks came out with that problem. 50-mile range that was more like 30. Rolling resistance, weight.
within MBARD's district and MBCP, how many school buses are there?
Well, in the retrofit and replacement world, when we were doing this with Prop 1B funds, there was almost 300 buses that we diesel retrofitted, diesel replaced. So you can start with that number, about 300, and maybe add plus or minus 5% of the smaller districts that either use the larger districts for transportation, or they have a small fleet that they maybe run not quite as regularly as the larger school districts. So a good number is 300.
So 300 times 400,000 for
Yep.
one? Okay.
It's a big chunk of change.
Please, go right ahead.
I'm just here question myself. So you said that is a problem to charge the buses, right?
Well, it's not a problem. You just have to figure out what your load requirements are.
Well, I understood in
manage
the
it.
beginning of your presentation that the schools had problems to charge the buses, or not?
Let me give you a perfect example of that. There's a large school district in Sacramento Valley called Twin Rivers Union School District. And they were the first in the state to really embrace enhancing their fleet with electric buses. So they bought 28 E-Lions, and they're very excited about it. So they brought the E-Lions into Sacramento, and then they thought that they could just probably plug them into the wall with level 1, 110 volt. And they quickly realized, oops.
Yeah.
So the importance of EV infrastructure and site assessment is critical. Even if you were to do it for a light duty fleet, you want to be able to make sure that you can charge the vehicles, especially the more that you have. Charging one bus, it's much, much easier than charging 10 buses.
Yeah.
So I think to the point that this gentleman gave, it'd be much better to utilize the course of the day instead of waiting till 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening when peak, as Tom pointed out, rates are sky high till 9 o'clock. And to do that, of course, is going to be pricey to the school district. So if you could balance your load, that's really the only, I wouldn't consider that a problem. I just say it's just managing
I think this is general a challenge regarding electrical vehicles. We need this infrastructure, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do also with our funding is we have a program called Plug-in Monterey Bay. It's all about EV infrastructure. We've done a lot of good things in that short. We've run it for 2.5 years now, and we've done some pretty cool things.
Okay, thank you.
And if you have an electric vehicle, then you already know about them.
I love this idea of the school bus.
Yeah, it's really great.
Public transportation in general, I think it's very, very important.
To go back to the health effects that my colleague here, Mr. Stedman, was talking about, can you discuss a little bit the PMI or the
PM 2.5?
Yeah, PM 2.5 for the children, and then also what is the excess burden on the children compared to the average person driving a car?
Well,
so if it's
the burden in terms of what I'm starting.
Just I guess some basic information for all of us here.
Yeah.
This PM, what is
PM particulate matter,
Yes.
2.5 micron in diameter. It's
Okay.
a really small particle that goes into the deep lung tissue,
Okay.
into the blood system.
Okay.
If it's carrying carcinogens, as Richard pointed out,
Right.
which is why the ARB, after years of research, said, "Hey, man, there's some nasty stuff on this little particle,
Right.
and it's carcinogenic."
Right.
And so they've listed diesel exhaust, 2.5 micron, as a toxic air contaminant. It's listed,
Gotcha.
and it creates a lot of respiratory problems for both the young and the elderly who have compromised immune systems.
Gotcha.
So those two demographic sets are extremely vulnerable.
Dr. Stedman, did you want to add more information for Dr. Bueno?
I do have a master's degree in public health, but not in electronics. Yeah, so children, when we do exposure assessments to look at how the particulate matter is affecting children and also the carcinogens such as diesel particulate. There's also things, acrolein, 1,3-butadiene, benzene. There's a lot of nasties in diesel exhaust and combustion byproducts in general. But disproportionately, children are exposed, so we actually have a compartmentalized exposure model that looks at 3 different portions of one's life. The earliest and latest being the worst, when older folks are disproportionately exposed because usually they have pre-existing conditions, lung and heart issues, so they may express a greater burden from the effects of these toxic particulate matter and other types of compounds. So that's how we know that children, definitely we want to reduce exposures at early ages where we can.
Right. So we're talking about exposure specifically to the proximity, right, of the truck.
Right. So, yeah, we know that, for instance, a lot's been done. The first step was to stop buses from idling at school. I mean, these guys would pull up in the winter, and it would be cold, and they would keep the car idling, or the bus idling, so that they could keep the children warm. But unbeknownst to them, they're actually pulling in a lot of the diesel particulate from the outside of the bus because it was a low pressure area inside the cabin. So now there are regulations that say you're not supposed to idle a bus for longer than 5 minutes anywhere. And so we're not sure what type of compliance we get with that, especially during the cold and hot summer days. But that's one of the requirements. That's aimed at reducing exposure of those compounds to children.
If there's, please.
So these 300 buses that you're talking about, how long it will take to get them all electric, and how much money? Is it going to be money always available, or how this thing going to work?
It's a very, very good question. So the legislation that goes behind the Health and Safety Code obviously comes through Sacramento. And when these programs using local funds are sent to the legislation in the form of a bill, they usually sunset. And it usually takes, and these assembly and senators are not asleep at the switch. So in particular, in regard to AB 923 funding, which funds these buses, that's due to sunset January 1, 2024. Now, I would really be surprised if that doesn't get extended. And I would like to be optimistic and tell you through my crystal ball that everything will be fine. They'll just continue to use the funding to do school buses. And I think the other thing to realize, too, is that just because these buses are sitting in bus yards doesn't necessarily mean that their utilization is at 100%. So as fleets learn how to manage their fleets, they could probably realize that they could get by with less. And that would be a good thing.
If there are no other questions, I have one that I've been dying to ask. I really like this quote from Dr. Reich about more people dying from car exhaust than from car accidents. However, given all the discussion we've had about the exposure of children and their concerns about health, we still don't require seat belts on buses.
They do.
They do?
Absolutely.
Oh, then you've answered my question. I was going to say, why don't you check that little box on the options?
It is checked. CHP will not certify that bus unless there are seat belts.
When did that happen?
About 4 years ago.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm asleep at the switch.
That's okay. And not only that, but the seat backs are now higher as well.
Excellent. The boss, Dr. Bueno.
So with regards to maximizing utilization of the fleet that you said, so it's not 300, let's say it's
175. I like to be optimistic, you know.
Let's say 200, right?
All right.
With regards to the subsidies, like for a fleet of 200, how much excess capital are we looking for to be able to fund the fleet of 200?
Well, doing the simple math, if you just started with a number like 200 and you multiplied it by 400,000,
Yes.
you're saying, all right, where can I get that money?
Right.
So when I put up that slide that showed some of the funding sources,
Yeah.
I can go back to that. The zero emission truck and bus voucher incentive program isn't an infinite supply of money either.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends on what comes in through AB 118 cap and trade dollars. And as long as those dollars are moving, the state will put them in the coffer, in this particular bucket of money. The Energy Commission is sporadic. They'll have chunks of change, and they'll do a grant funding opportunity. In this case, it was 607. So a lot of the buses that went into that application process across the entire state, we had a large percentage of them that were in R3 districts. So they'll get funded. So anything that we can do, if we grab some of the beneficiary mitigation plan by applying, by saying we want to do let's say the Air District says we want to do 30 school buses with some of that money, we'll gladly do a proposal like that. So they haven't released the proposal yet for this mitigation plan because it's phase 2 of the VW fiasco, the diesel fiasco. But when it happens, we'll be there to apply for it for sure. And then, of course, with Monterey Bay Community Power and our local funding sources, I think we can get a good bite at electrifying the fleet.
So I'd like to address one aspect of what you just said about the funding at the CEC being sporadic. I can tell you, having been there, when we have budget deficits, the legislature comes through and sweeps accounts that are unused, and that's how that money disappears.
Yeah.
It goes, the legislature uses it for other purposes. even though it's already been authorized and everything. So it's really keeping a positive budget situation at the state level that makes sure those funds don't disappear. Any other questions? I'd like to thank you very much for coming in this evening and give us this presentation. This is very helpful information for us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. Public comment. Yes, thank you for the reminder. Would anyone from the public wish to comment on this item? Okay. Oh, we have one. Sir?
Yes, my name is Dave Lessakar. I'm from Seaside. And of course, the goals of this program are laudatory, but I think that a given amount of money could go a lot farther if one takes into account that it's in the school district's self-interest to shift to electric vehicles, because not only will they save $160,000 over 10 years, which is probably around the lifetime of a bus, but there's also decreased maintenance costs, which may be as on the same order, similarly large to the fuel savings of $16,000 a year that the gentleman quoted. In addition, electric vehicles, because they have so much more, since their parts are more durable and simpler, there's less depreciation, and so that's another savings. And so I think if the Air Resources Board district can present these kinds of facts and some calculations showing what the total savings will be over 5 years or 10 years, whatever the lifetime of a bus is, then you don't need to buy the bus for them. Maybe you give them a 10% incentive, sort of like for buying an electric vehicle. I mean, the state incentive for buying an electric vehicle is $2,500, which is actually, barely 5% of the cost of a new Tesla. Okay, Model 3. Okay, that's one thing, one way to make the dollars go a lot farther. And another one is he was talking about the school district putting up solar panels in order to provide electricity. But as I've mentioned in other venues here before Monterey Bay Community Power, the cost of commercial scale solar power is at least twice as expensive, per kilowatt as utility scale solar power, like Monterey Bay Community Power has got bids out with eyes on contracting for utility scale solar power, which is going to be half as cheap as the average commercial scale, and 1/4 as cheap as the typical residential scale solar. And so I think that when Monterey Bay Community Power can provide electricity cheaper than what the school district can get by putting up commercial scale power on their property, and another factor there is that just the capital cost of okay, once again, I don't know the numbers for commercial power, but for residential solar power installations, the capital cost alone is twice the capital cost per kilowatt compared with utility scale solar. So it just isn't, what we want to do is get the cost of electricity so low that, economic forces just drive the switch to electric. So I think that the program can be made a heck of a lot more efficient. Pardon my French.
Any other public comments?
Michael Saint, Campaign for Sustainable Transportation. I'd like to go back to Councilmember Stedman's comment about the idling of the buses for 5 minutes, and I ask him if there has ever been some type of ordinance or another policy to go to the schools when the parents drop their children off and pick them up at that time. I don't know if there could be a sign in the parking area or the school. And also something I see which would also be very hard to probably fix is a lot of people are sitting in parking lots in shopping centers charging their phones with their cars idling and doing it that way. I just want to throw that out also. Thank you.
You wish to comment?
I don't think we've done one here, a campaign, but at my old agency in the Pacific Northwest, we actually gave out coffee mugs to the parents. And it said on it, turn your engine off, stop idling, and drink your coffee. And so,
Wow, that's pretty direct.
yeah, we could do something like that here as well, because that is a concern, although the vehicles they're driving are not as much of a concern compared to the diesel.
Can I say something about that? I always think that the kids are a very good resource of pushing the parents to do the right thing. From my experience in Germany, a child would tell the parent, turn off your engine, because they learned that in the school. They teach them. So they come home, and if you are using too much water, your child will tell, hey, we're using too much water, and they are great. So I think a good idea would be working with the schools and make presentation for the kids about these subjects as well.
That's where they hand out the coffee cups.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and we've done that actually. We're not doing it this year, but in previous years, we've done a clean air calendar art contest with students, and this is going down to I think 1st through 12th grade. And we usually pick a theme, and one of those was idling. So we get the kids interested. We tell them why they need to not have their parents idle when they pick them up and so forth. So, and then they design a calendar around that. So we definitely could plug that back in again.
Yeah, that's good.
Any other public comments on this item, item 4? If not, we'll move to item 5. Again, thank you all very much. We'll move to item 5 on the consent agenda. Before we move on this, does anyone have any changes, or I should say wish to pull one of the items from the consent agenda to make changes? I have a suggestion that I'd like to make, and I'll put this in the form of a question to council. Item 6, the minutes from March 30th, we convened a business meeting during the workshop so that we would all be free to talk and discuss openly without concern about being in violation of the Brown Act. However, these meeting minutes say nothing about why we met. So I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile to have a sentence in there, something to the effect, for the public's benefit. The CAC convened a special meeting concurrent with a public workshop so that the CAC members could openly participate in discussions with the public. However, no action was taken by the CAC. Mr. Shaw, would that be acceptable? Meeting minutes that don't say anything, I think makes the public wonder, what did they have a meeting for?
I think 2 points. First, I just want to point out that there is going to be a recap of the workshop that's on this agenda that JR is going to give us in a short while from now. Second, if there's a motion to amend the minutes, then we can take that item, have discussion, hear the motion, and vote on the motion to amend the minutes.
All right, then I make that motion.
Well, before
Oh, was that, you had more items.
well, before we take a motion on item 6, I think first we need to ask the public if there's anyone that wants to pull item 5, and then if we are pulling item 6, we can move to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 6, which will be open to discussion.
Okay, very good. Any comments from the public on consent agenda item 5? Okay.
Move approval.
Second.
So we're approving consent agenda item 5. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. So on item 6, I think you all understand what I'm saying. I would move that we just add that sentence to essentially explaining what we were doing during that workshop into the meeting minutes. Any discussion? I'm sorry, we go for a, we go, I'm looking for a motion first, obviously. Go ahead, Mr.
I
Groot.
thought you made the motion.
I did, but I suppose out of order.
Okay.
So I think the motion stands.
Okay.
It's open for discussion and public comment before we move on the motion.
Yes.
All right, so my question about this is the second sentence says, a quorum was not established, and for other public agencies that I've been a part of, there is no record of minutes presented for a meeting where there is no quorum.
Let's turn to Ms. Lair.
Councilmember
So I'd
Groot,
like
I'm
a
sorry, that
clarification
is
on that.
actually a mistake, so I need to correct that. So
Very
thank you for
good, though,
pointing
that you
out.
caught that, because I know we had a quorum.
Yes, you had a quorum. You had
Well,
7.
I was reading this over and over and over, trying to figure out where is there not a quorum, so I'm glad you
Don't lose
corrected
any
that.
sleep over that.
All
one.
right,
So
never
we do,
mind.
that's a correction then, right?
Yes.
All right.
We'll correct that.
Any other comments?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Osmer.
Public comment.
Discussion? Any public comments on the change? Seeing none, I'll take us to the vote. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Now we need to approve the meeting minutes, correct?
We just did.
Yeah, the approval with the motion is the.
All right, sufficient. Okay, good. So we're past the consent agenda. I always know how to delay things as much as possible. Don't laugh at me, Mr. Habashi. I apologize for my lack of understanding around Robert's rules of order, but as you can see, we want to do things properly here. So I think we're going to move on to, do I need to ask for any more public comment on that? We're done. Okay. On the regular agenda, let's hear from Mr. Habashi, the CEO's report, item 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to start with the staffing update. First, I'd like to introduce Marcela Castro, and here she is. Marcela joined us as the manager of human resources. She got 20 years of experience working for a law firm down in Irvine, and in the last 6 years of that, I believe she handled all the human resources work. And I think if she can handle a staff, an office full of lawyers, I think she can handle us really easily. So, and not only that, but Marcela, by the way, have a bachelor degree in environmental science, so she fits very nicely with our mission.
Does she have that degree yet?
A long time ago, yes.
Okay. Because I know you're graduating next month in something else.
Masters,
yeah.
Okay.
I also like to introduce Lena Williams. This is Lena. Lena is joining us as the manager of Energy Account Services, replacing Mark Buckman. As you probably would know, he left us a while back. Lena has over 15 years of experience in working in account management. She worked in sales and account management of solar rooftops, and so she has experience working with Tesla as well as Solar City. And glad to have her, glad to have both of them actually. We are almost there. I think we got 2 more staff members and we'll be pretty much got all the folks that we need to have for the time being anyway. With that, I'll move on to the next item. As you probably know, back in October, the policy board basically said that you can go get a full-time general counsel. And since then, Rob has been helping us, and he on a loaner from the county of Monterey. He's done such a good job for us, and I've asked him if he can stay on for good, and he accepted. And to the extent that the policy board approve of his appointment as the general counsel for Monterey Bay, he will be starting July 1st.
Well, congratulations on these great additions to your staff.
Thank you, sir. Power supply rates, I was planning to say this month what I've been saying for the last several months, which is we don't know exactly what the power supply rates will be because we're waiting on PG&E to announce their generation rates as well as the PCIA. However, around 2 o'clock this afternoon, we've got PG&E's what we believe to be the final rates, and that will become effective July 1st, perhaps later if there's a lot of contention with them on it. And both Mary Hernandez as well as Mike Miller from our staff put their heads together around 2 o'clock, and by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they already came up with a new assumptions and new basis for what our budget and what our revenue will be. Our expectation was that generation rates for PG&E will go down and PCIA rates will go up, and we're going to be squeezed in more than one way. As it turned out, PG&E's generation rates looks like they're going to go up by an average of about 7 or 8%. Meanwhile, PCIA, and we estimated that to be it's going to go up by about 20%. It looks like it's going to go up by 30%. The combination of the two is likely to actually improve our financial position, and we are looking probably at about $20 million more than what we estimated that we will have last time. And actually, in the mid-year report, we are estimating whatever that is that we're going to be talking about, what I'll be talking about next, is now not current, and it's likely that our revenues will be about $20 million higher than what I expected.
So I'm not sure I understood, and I just maybe everyone else did, but does that mean you planned ahead for this well enough that you actually have a little surplus, or?
We're fairly conservative. Our estimate was PG&E will reduce their generation rates by about 13% and will increase the PCIA rate by 20%. And the combination of the two would have caused us to reduce our rates considerably in order to keep up and remain competitive. Now that they are likely to actually raise the rates, not reduce them, and even though the PCIA rates may increase more than what we estimated, still the fact that they are raising their generation rates, not reducing them, is certainly going to help our financial position to the tune of about $20 million for this year.
And so the other way to look at that is those customers that remain with PG&E will have net higher rates than Monterey Bay Clean Power customers will.
Well, remember, we always match their rates, rate for rate. Then after that, we give the rebates. So, and that's why we are seeing more likely a better picture financially than what we estimated, because they are reducing rates, we'll have to reduce our rates further, and because they are increasing the PCIA, we're going to have to reduce our rates again. But as it is, we're not likely to reduce our rates both ways. It's going to be only one way, and the other one will cause us to push our rates up to match. Yes,
please.
So the rates and the PCIA, how often do they change per year?
They're supposed to change every year.
Okay.
And they're supposed to be finalized in November to be effective January 1st. But as you probably know, January came and went, and PG&E was a little busy doing other things, and they've been postponing this 2 months at a time, and now we're looking at July 1st for the rates to be effective. But just from July 1st to September last, we are seeing the picture improves quite a bit.
Please, Mr. Amzaketa. Ms. Keita.
So
Yes.
these rates of PG&E, they're going to hurt the public? They're going to hurt the consumers?
Yeah, if they increase the generation rates, then it will come out of somebody's pocket. Yes.
The consumers?
Oh, I don't see you. It's obviously not coming from the shareholders. I can guarantee you that much.
Bankruptcy is not a good thing.
Yeah.
I hope the state does something.
Mr. Hartman?
Mr. Bashi, have you entertained the thought about developing our own rate structure and not relying on PG&E's rates?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea really would be that once we reach that target reserve that we would like to have, we will really have no particular reason to keep following the rates. Obviously, we followed the rates for 2 years, maybe even 3 years, in order to make sure that we that the customer will always see us as lower than PG&E, regardless of what rate class they belong to. And so we always needed to do that. We needed to follow the rates just to make sure that we are always competitive and we're not confusing the customer. But we probably next year will find ourselves in a position of, once we reach that reserve target, of a fairly comfortable position as far as how much we need in order to meet our cost obligation. Then we can afford to do the rates the way rates should be done. You do the cost of service, you allocate that among the customer classes, then you develop a rate that works well with the wholesale supply cost, because that is changing, and it's changing very differently than the way retail rates for PG&E changing today. So the short answer to your question is yes, and I'm hoping that we'll do that sooner than later.
So I think we might all benefit, Mr. Hartman, by you describing why you asked that question. Is there a reason behind it?
No, it's just that so initially when MBCP started, we tied ourselves to the PG&E rates because it was easier to do. I mean, maybe Tom could.
I think all the CCAs have done it that way.
Yeah, so just initially, but I'm looking forward to the time when we can develop our own and
I think
just have a better structure.
It's a great question. It's a good point. Thank you. Please go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Capron.
I wonder, Tom, if you could just briefly go over the current assumptions we're making about the amount of the net revenue that is dedicated after we've paid into reserves, how much of it is dedicated to lowering rates and how much of it is for programs, and how you anticipate an increase in $20 million in our overall revenue surplus is going to affect the amount that's available for programs next year.
Yeah, I think the way we established it is this. We're going to be, when the numbers for PG&E are finalized, then we're going to update our budget again. And what that does is it changes the numbers for programs and rebates as well as money going to reserves. And in this fashion, that programs are budgeted at 2% of revenues. So obviously the budget for the programs will go up a little bit because 2% of 240 million is a little higher than 2% of 220 million. So we'll see an increase in the program budget for this year. The remaining dollar figure, which we estimated a while back to be roughly about, Tiffany, 40 million, is that close enough? Yes. Okay. That was split 20% to rebates and 80% to reserves. If that increases by $20 million, and now it goes up to 60 or a little bit less than 60 because of the money going to programs, then we'll still spread it 20-80, and so you're going to see more money go into rebates and certainly a lot more money go into reserves as well. So that basically the funding for all these three buckets will change because now we are expecting revenues to be a little higher.
And at the point that our reserves are up to the level that we're our target level, do we know at this point how we're going to allocate resources, or will we regroup around that issue at that point?
Yeah, the way we have it in pro forma is basically saying once we reach the point of we have enough reserves, then whatever money left over, difference between supply and between revenues and expenses will be split between 50-50. And that was more of a placeholder just to kind of have it there and how eventually when we reach that point the boards would like to split it. That will be subject for later discussions. But 50-50 seems like a reasonable way to divvy it up at this point.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's not directly related.
Is your microphone on?
I have a question. Tom, before, if you had solar energy in your house, PG&E allowed to use this energy only for one residence, okay? And the rest, it was going to the grid. Did anything change with Monterey Bay?
No, we've pretty much copied exactly the same approach that PG&E have taken to their relationship with what we call the NEM customers, net energy metering customers. So with the exception of one thing, that if you have a solar rooftop and at the end of the year you happen to be a net producer, you put more into the grid, our rates that we pay you for that energy was roughly for the first year at about 6.135, or really it was split the difference between wholesale and retail price. Meanwhile, PG&E was just paying you with a wholesale, which was about 2.9 cents per kilowatt hour.
So in a range, when they have a pump and a house, they are only allowed to use the electricity for the house?
No, as long as it's behind the meter, you can use it for whatever you want to use it for.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Kaplan.
Actually, PG&E has a program that if you have 2 meters on one piece of property, you can allocate your solar to both meters, although it's not always cost effective because of the rate structure, but there is an opportunity to do that.
Okay, 2 meters.
Rates and metering all gets very complicated very fast. And I suspect that, like every other CCA, Monterey Bay didn't get into the rate setting business because it's complicated. And they basically copied what the utilities are doing. But the earlier answer to Mr. Hartman's question that at some point we're going to diverge will put a lot more power into the hands of this council and the other boards to make rate structures make sense. They're archaic. They're 100 years old, and they're based on anachronisms that really don't make any sense anymore, like charging buses overnight when now we really want to charge them in the daytime. You know, things like that. You have something else you wish to say?
Yeah, it's just that for me that makes not much sense. You know, we live in a region with a lot of ranches, and the ranches has 2 or 3 houses, right? And that people are producing energy, and then they have to throw the energy into the grid instead of using the energy they are producing to the residences in their properties.
It's possible. I don't know why would people want to build solar that's larger than what they can consume, but it is that sometimes the rate design skews what people do. For example, if PG&E offers you for the energy that you produce from your solar 40 cents, while replacement energy that comes at night time comes in at 6 cents or 7 cents, you'd be probably better off selling that energy into the grid and reducing your electric bill quite a bit. So rate design does play a part in why people do what they do. And what we're going to do in the future is try to kind of right that chip up a little bit, because right now I think it's way tilted, and it's, if you see the curves for the wholesale price relative to retail price, you'll be really shocked, you know, with the wholesale dipping during the day down to near zero. Meanwhile, the retail is going up to 20 and 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Then they eventually come around and meet again, and on the off-peak hours. So that is part of what we want to do eventually, our own rates, so we can write this up a little bit.
Okay.
Shall we let Mr. Habashi continue? Thank you. Go ahead.
I wanted to report on a mid-year report, but you probably already got it from the previous discussion. So the mid-year report that we had in your packet did not take into account all the discussion about the changes in PG&E's rates, so it is really outdated now. But it does show that even with the incredibly conservative assumptions that we had before, it looks like we're still going to be about $1 million higher overall than we estimated previously. Now I'm looking at not just $1 million. It looks like it's going to be about 20, if the numbers are correct. But I want to put question mark next to it, because that work was done only in about an hour with 2 folks that got the numbers and worked on it very quickly. So we will be a lot more accurate next month when we meet with you. I want to also to report on the fact that both Morro Bay and San Luis Obispo are now part of this organization, and the implementation plan that we submitted to the CPUC was certified. So we are gearing up to bring those folks in January of 2020. Not only that, but this gentleman right here to my left has been doing a heck of a job running around down there in San Luis Obispo, rallying up the other 5 cities along with the county. And interestingly enough, we somehow ended up with 2 more cities down from Santa Barbara. So we, and one of them is ready.
That's not in San Luis Obispo County, is it?
It was we were going down to talk to San Luis Obispo County and folks from Santa Maria, which is a very large city down in northern part of Santa Barbara and is being served by PG&E and not being considered at this point by the folks in Santa Barbara who are trying to form a CCA. Those folks are in Santa Barbara City and a couple of other cities that happen to be in Southern California. Edison is service territory. So Santa Maria as well as Guadalupe, both of them are cities in the PG&E service territory that also in Santa Barbara. Both of them are very interested. I believe Santa Maria just informed JR that they will be putting a resolution on their council meeting coming May 21st. Did I get that right? We also got the same thing from Paso Robles. They also go on to their city on the 21st. Grover Beach, I believe, is going on the 20th. And the other three cities, we think they are following suit fairly quickly. We're still working on the counties, maybe taking another few more weeks, but so far I think JR has been down there roughly about, 20 times? One too many times. And he knows the route by heart now, so he can close his eyes and trucks all the way down to San Luis Obispo. It's been, and I've been with him a couple of times. He does a masterful job in bringing those folks along, and it looks like, if all goes well. By the way, Delray Oaks is coming in next week. They got the resolution on the books going in next week. So if all goes well and we get the 5 cities in San Luis Obispo as well as the county and the 2 cities down in Santa Barbara, this agency will be 30 jurisdictions strong with 4 counties and part of a fifth county. So
this is a policy board decision, correct, to keep expanding?
I'm hoping, yeah. Well, definitely to Santa Barbara, to San Luis Obispo, and even Santa Barbara, because we met with them a while back with Chairman Bruce McPherson, and he's certainly welcoming the idea of unifying the Central Coast under one umbrella. And I think going all the way from Santa Cruz to Santa Barbara, wrapping the entire coast in. Only working on PG&E service territories, I think, is going to be a good thing.
So that was my first question, that's really policy board that will decide that. But does it matter if they're in Southern California Edison or PG&E service territory? Does it matter to us?
It's a bit complicated. Santa Barbara and Guadalupe are not in Southern California Edison. And the question was posed to me by the folks in Santa Barbara who, at the time, city of Santa Barbara, saying, can we join you? And I said, feel free and just let us know when you want to. And they said, well, will the PG&E Southern California split become an issue? And I said, not from a technical perspective, but from a political perspective, you're going to have to really have your county as well as the cities comfortable with the notion that some of them are being charged different rates than the other ones, because we would have to sort of try to match Southern California Edison for those customers and do the same thing for the PG&E customers. Probably adds a little more complexity into the work that we do, but from a technical perspective, it's doable. It's just the political side of it that is a little difficult. And I think Santa Barbara, the city of Santa Barbara, as well as the other cities in the Southern California Edison area, decided maybe they need to form their own, and I think they're working on their own CCA right now.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Hartman has a question.
I think just to clarify, that's because they're going to be getting separate billing.
Yeah.
Right. So that's part of the complication.
Well, and as Mr. Habashi pointed out, and the differences in the rates could be substantially, and it'd be more challenging for us because SCE's rates are different than PG&E's rates, and how do you maintain that differential in an equitable way? I think there are other CCAs that have done this already. Marin has adopted cities that are outside Marin County into theirs, but they're still all PG&E service territory, so the billing issue hasn't been a problem for them, but it could be for us.
Yeah, I think probably Marin is the only one that decided to venture outside and to another area that was not contiguous at the time.
Mm-hmm.
but beyond that, I haven't seen a single CCA that try to do that, and I would not suggest it to you. It's not an easy thing to do,
Wow.
and
That's why you're doing it, right?
well, they are adjacent, of course. Monterey and San Luis Obispo are right there, attached, and neighbors, and do a lot of things together. So
It's a big deal, and I'm sorry to stay on it, Mr. Habashi, but we have some more questions. Mr. Hartman.
Yeah, just following in with that. So when, prior to Monterey Bay Community Power forming, there was talk about if other jurisdictions wanted to join in, that we would charge them a fee, nominal fee or whatever. So I'm hoping that you're not charging a fee. Is that true? Or?
Well, we've been kind of tossing $5,000 per as a token of appreciation. We have to do an implementation plan generally. I don't mean to. We do have to update the implementation plan. We have to pay for that. And when San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay joined in, they paid for the upgrade of the implementation plan, about $12,000 plus, and they also paid for the attorney that fixed up the JPA. This time around, we don't have to pay for the attorney, and we told the jurisdiction that just count on somewhere around $5,000 each to pay for the upgrade of the implementation plan. That's relative to what this agency paid when we put this whole thing together, which cost somewhere around in the north of $3 million. That eventually got paid back, but still, this agency was willing to take out a loan of $3 million plus in order to get this thing rolling. I think they can afford the $5,000 each.
That seems like a bargain.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that I commend you on being receptive to bringing in other areas. So, and another thing I'd like to add to that is that I think at some point we should look at changing the governance structure of these boards, so of policy, operations, and the CAC, and give everybody a seat at the table and not have shared seats like we do now. And I think at some point you're going to have to, I guess we'll see what the numbers are, but right now having a 12-member board is kind of a funny number for a board. So anyway, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think when we brought in San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay, we really didn't have time to try to look around to find out what's the perfect structure for the board. We really need to move things and get things done before December so we can put the implementation plan in place and move on to get them in by 2020. I think if we manage to get this group, this is a much larger group in another county, if we can bring it, it will warrant that we will go back to the policy board and say, here's different structure. We can continue on with the one we have and do it this way, or we can have everybody have a seat at the table, just like many other CCAs do it, or we can come up with dream up a third structure and just give them those options and let them debate it and choose. Brent just reminded me that I skipped over the RFOs for power supply. My apologies. We got one.
Thank you, Ms. Lair.
Yeah, we got one that we went out with an RFO, just only us, to try to get some carbon-free. The offers that were made were not as good as we expected. So we hold them back on moving forward on this one. We got a second RFO that went out, I believe, yesterday, and that's with us and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, requiring or asking for somewhere around 800 gigawatt hours between the two of us. We will see what comes, and we'll try to go into partnership again one more time to bring in another renewable power supply. Because we do need it. We have certain obligations to meet number of laws, SB 350 and SB 101, and I forgot the others, but quite a few out there, and we need to meet our obligations to bring in long-term power supplies, and that's what we are doing. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to report on, Mr. Chairman, is that the streaming of the meeting is just one part of the record management program that Brittany's been working on. for almost a year now, and doing a heck of a job, and she really deserves 100% of the credit for all the work that's been doing. And I just, since this is a record management program, and she's the record manager, I want to go on the record thanking her for all the good work that she's done. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any additional questions that you might have.
Were you going to talk about the operating budget?
Well, I did quickly.
Okay,
I mentioned that.
All
yes.
right, good. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it because there were so many slides in here. I was just wondering if you were going to go through some of those. But that I understand. Mr. Hartman.
Could I, under your power supply RFO for, you're talking about the resource adequacy, working with 5 other CCAs. Can you explain, I don't quite understand the process that, how did staff select ACES? And was that, did that go for approval, or was that just a staff decision?
Of course, it's coming for approval. The way it will not be, it's not coming for approval. Let me back off a little bit. The 5 entities came together and decided, let's do RA together and find one entity that will manage the acquisition of and splitting it among the 5 members. We send it out to a number of folks that do that kind of work, and we received, I believe, 5 proposals. We looked and interviewed all of them. And when I say the staff here, I'm talking about the power supply directors from each one of those entities, and they eventually selected ACES. They got the background, they got the depth, and their price was the best of the bunch. And now we're going to have 2 agreements in order to make this happen. One agreement with ACES, and the other agreement is to jointly pay the entity that will be paying ACES, because ACES doesn't want to negotiate with all 5 of us, and you don't want to be having 6 people trying to negotiate one agreement. So what we decided on is that we're really going to have a single agreement with ACES, and the counterparty to that will be Peninsula Clean Energy. So they will be the ones paying ACES, and they'll be the contracting agency with them. Then we put another agreement together that's project participation, funding participation agreement, or whatever we call it. Probably, Rob, you can help me here. And that agreement will allow for the 5 agencies to commit to make payment to PCE, to Peninsula Clean Energy, so Peninsula can pay the contractor or ACES.
So is there, do you mind if I continue?
No, please, go
Is there
right
discussion then about forming an umbrella organization for, like in this situation, these 5 CCAs to serve just exactly what you're talking about?
Yes, yeah. We not only for that, but because there are a number of bills floating in Sacramento these days about having a central buyer that will buy on behalf of all the utilities and allocate the resources to them. Now the CCAs are talking about, why don't we form a central buyer? Since we're the only buyers in town, why don't we form a JPA of the JPAs, so to speak, that will bring us all together, if possible, and have that become the central buyer. Of course, that's going to take a little time. For the RA, we just needed to move something now because we need to start buying and locking resources for 2020. And we wanted to do that using that umbrella agreement and working with ACES.
I'd imagine that is going to start to present some challenges too, because you go combining to get economies of scale, but now you're talking about essentially becoming a monopsony, a single buyer for all the CCAs, and I think that creates market issues as well. We could be headed down a path here of complexity that the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, got themselves into 20 years ago in the energy crisis.
Yeah, if you're talking about energy, not the RA. If you're talking about the RA, I think it's a really a slam dunk to get a central buyer to do that.
RA, the resource adequacy requirements that the PUC puts on all the load-serving entities.
Yeah, and that's only capacity, it's insurance policy, just to make sure that resources exist in case we have problems on the grid. Should we have a central buyer for resources? I think the huge push that's coming from the state is, with all the scattered players out there, it is kind of tough to try to push for a power plant the size of 2,000 megawatt, especially if it's a penny more expensive than what's out there, which today is wind and solar plus storage. So is it a good thing? I think if we can individually do the buys that we do and meet the status goals and be as efficient and bring in all the renewables that could be gotten, then there is no need at all for that central buyer to do anything. But if we can't, if we collectively cannot put a plan together that will meet the status requirement, and we push it in different directions, that everybody chasing after the least expensive renewables they can buy, then maybe a central buyer is the right thing to do.
I think Mr. Shaw may have wanted to add something.
I was going to expand on Tom's explanation of the purchase structure for Councilmember Hartman, but I think Tom did an excellent job laying it out. So unless there's another question, I'm fine.
Mr. Osmer.
Yeah, if I could, I wanted to go back to the uniting the Central Coast.
So let's do it this way.
Sure.
Is there any more questions around the power supply RFOs, and then we'll go back to, if there's no more questions, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I guess on my original question was going to be, is Santa Barbara in the Central Coast? But I guess that's been answered. Now my question is Kern County in the Central Coast? Is there a policy at this point that governs exactly how far MBCP goes?
Good question. No, I don't have a written policy from the board to tell me you stop there and no farther. I can give you my personal opinion. First, I encourage, and I've actually asked people who are out pushing for CCAs to be formed everywhere, even to the tune of making some monetary compensation to help Kern County, King County, as well as Fresno to go out there and form their own CCAs. I think probably, given that they are more Central Valley than it is coastal areas, that maybe there's a bit of a difference that may be difficult to try to bring them in. And if you do, quite frankly, as it is, if we bring in San Luis Obispo and parts of Santa Barbara, the footprint for this agency is going to be quite large. It will be the largest of all the CCAs out there. And I've always haven't been too crazy about becoming too large, because I think when you become too large, you become like another PG&E.
You're finding out how much time you spend in cars driving around to all these different counties, too. I'm looking at JR, who's been doing. Mr. Osmers, you have some more?
Yeah, and I guess I was actually being facetious about Kern County. I wouldn't involve Kern County in anything.
I think it's a good question. I think it's a good question.
But I guess it's, when you go to that, when you go to those extremes, and that's what it is at Santa Barbara, is that things get much more difficult and certainly much less local, just as we are here. Where's the community advisory board going to meet? That is a community advisory board, Paso Robles, or something midway. Maybe it's Greenfield. I don't know, but it's something that I think at a point looking at it, it erodes the idea of the community advisory board.
I think it's a perfectly legitimate. Perfectly legitimate question.
Changes, so it's a challenge.
Yeah. In fact, these are excellent questions, because I don't recall hearing this kind of discussion at the policy board level. So I think it should be coming from here.
Is the name going to change? You're no longer part of Monterey Bay.
Did you have your microphone on?
I wanted to make a comment.
Were you done?
Yes.
Done?
Yeah.
Okay, go right
yeah.
ahead.
Thank you.
I wanted to express my displeasure at Rob becoming general counsel, and now I'm sorry I told Tom what a great attorney he is. because Rob has actually been working with the Air District, and he is amazing. He just got a significant settlement award for the district, and we were hoping he would be coming over there for a lot more work for us. But in all honesty, congratulations, and I think you couldn't do better in hiring Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah, clearly he's going to have his hands full than more than just managing 3 boards. You can see there's a few other things he's involved with as well. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Ron.
So, I don't want to cut off discussion on this because I think these are all good questions. If anyone else has any more.
And just briefly, I'm glad, Dennis, that you brought up the issues you brought up. I mean, I've been in favor of the expansion, but I think it's really good to be thoughtful about what the right size is. And I don't think it's just the Community Advisory Council, but I think it's the boards also at some point, a board from a much bigger geographical area. We're not just the Monterey Bay, we're the Monterey Bay community power, and you know, how do we continue to be community power if we get too large? And it sounds like Tom shares those sentiments, that there's a right size. We don't have to be the whole state.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, it's going to be the largest geographically, and that's not a blessing by any stretch. It's going to be creates a number of problems, as I think council members are bringing up.
Yeah, and I think the name is the least of our problems, because, you know, in Santa Cruz County, we have a Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission.
Okay. Any more questions or oxymorons anybody would like to bring up? Is that it?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know. I think you have to come better prepared, Mr. Habashi, to the Community Advisory Council meetings than you do to some of your other meetings, I think.
I'll do my best, sir.
Okay. It's not that you're not prepared. It's just I think we surprised you a little bit. Okay, so I think we're moving on then. I'm sorry, public comment. Thank you. I could see heads rising up from members at the table. Any public comments on this topic, please? Forgive me, we're on item 7. Yes, sir.
Dave Lessicar again, Seaside. And one little comment. Mr. Habashi, you made reference to the advantages of being in a position to negotiate larger power contracts. And do you think that what may someday become Central Coast Community Power is going to be at a large enough scale in order to, you know, get very close to the most favorable rates available to large customers?
Is that okay, Mr. Chairman, if I
please.
answer? Generally, when it comes to long-term contracts, the larger the better. You're always going to be able to get a better deal if you're a little larger. There will be a point of diminishing returns when you become so large that the bureaucracy takes over, and then you end up actually paying more because you just want to satisfy whatever bureaucratic process that you have to do. And PG&E suffers from that a great deal. For short-term acquisition, it's not a good thing to be a large entity. Actually, the smaller you are, the better deal that you can strike. But if you have to be buying short-term, and I've learned that over the last 3 years more often than not. So we always break the short-term buys that we need to get over time. This way we'll be able to capture the best deals possible. So yes, up to a point on long-term contracts to be large, but no for the short-term contracts.
Okay, and so what I would like to say there is that the large scale here is going to be the CCAs for Silicon Valley and Los Angeles County, and so if that sort of defines maybe something like the top end of the scale, a smaller population or smaller electricity use, CCA like ours might very well need to band together with other smaller CCAs in order to get the most advantageous pricing. But I think a good thing about this is that then the CCAs for all the different metropolitan areas and allied rural areas they're going to be competing with each other to try to provide the lowest price electricity for their customers and to attract business by having the lower price electricity. So I think that it ultimately might work out quite well.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else wishing to make a comment?
Michael Saint, just really quickly, you mentioned something about getting away from PG&E rates eventually with the increase of the reserves. Of the older CCAs, has anyone been able to do that, to get rid of them and then do their own rates and stuff like that?
I'm not aware of any. I know that very early on in the process, probably in the first year, maybe the first and second year of their formation, MCE did exactly that. They basically gave a discount to all the customers and they created their own or formed their own rates. It took them a couple of years to very quickly go back to line up with PG&E because there were quite a bit of opt-outs. People were confused on the top of having to, some of them having to pay more than what they would have paid PG&E because the discounts didn't work for everybody's favor. But I think most utilities, most CCAs today tend to follow PG&E in one way or another, either give a rebate as we do or give a discount from PG&E's rates. That's how I understand it. But I think not too many of them, not one that I can point to, can claim today or even maybe next year that they have sufficient money in reserves to be able to do what they need to do right by their customers.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Just give me one moment. Mr. Groot has a urgent personal issue he's going to attend to. Okay, so I think we are done with this item. Mr. Habashi, thank you. Item 7's closed. So item 8 is receiving an update from the Energy Solutions Senior Engineer, Mr. Ed Pike, on EV infrastructure building codes. Welcome back, Mr. Pike. I think you were with us in the November meeting that we had. If you would, for just one moment, allow me to ask Mr. Habashi if he'd like to introduce you or explain, really a question I have is the circumstances under which Mr. Pike is back before us, so we'll all understand.
I can, but I'm just going to ask JR.
Sure. He's been very patient sitting there for hours.
Yes.
And I think after this presentation, just for the benefit of my council, I think we'll take a short bio break after this one. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Killigrew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Byron. Effectively, Ed's been working with the Air District, helping to rally and get support on adopting REACH codes around EV infrastructure at the local government level. So he's been engaging a lot of the different communities, the elected officials, the city managers, to try to move them along to provide codes or at least opportunities to streamline permitting or set up codes that are advantageous for EV infrastructure. And so he's here tonight to kind of give you an update and provide you kind of next steps in terms of how to continue this opportunity to make sure that all jurisdictions have access to this type of code upgrades or code improvements, so that it's good on business, it's good on residents, and it's streamlining the process to adopt further EV infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. And this is an information item, council members. Mr. Pike, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair and the members for the opportunity to give you an update on EV infrastructure codes. And so we'll talk more about the question that came up earlier on EV infrastructure, which is obviously a very timely topic. So my name is Ed Pike with Energy Solutions, as you already know. We very much appreciate the opportunity to work in the Monterey Bay Area on EV infrastructure. Appreciate support from Monterey Bay Air Resources District. So just to quickly give you an outline, we'll talk about what the opportunity is for EV infrastructure building codes, and many of you, will already remember this from last time, so maybe just a little refresher. We'll talk about accomplishments to date, what are some additional opportunities, and then some opportunities for Monterey Bay community power support. And I will warn you, there is a potential homework assignment. Sorry, I'm the parent of a high school kid, so couldn't resist. So you probably all are familiar with CalGreen, so this is probably just a refresher, but the California Green Building Codes contain mandatory and then also a voluntary model code for environmental requirements that aren't found in other sections of Title 24. And it does include a section on EV infrastructure, which is good, but it doesn't address existing buildings. It doesn't sync up with infrastructure requirements for accessibility. It doesn't align with the state goals. The numbers are not high enough. And it doesn't require building complete circuits. So someone can just move into, say, a multifamily building, condo or apartment, and plug and play. Fortunately, though, local agencies have the authority to adopt their own codes. And this is a perfect time for them to do that because they have to update other unrelated CalGreen updates as well as one for EV infrastructure, but and all of Title 24 regarding electrical, mechanical, and plumbing and all sorts of things. So this is something that they could easily or relatively easily piggyback on an EV infrastructure, a local amendment to the codes they already have to go through a process to adopt and then implement by January 21 of 2020. Oh, and let me mention, feel free to ask questions or make comments along the way.
Okay.
So we'll just briefly refresher from last time. EV infrastructure is a critical barrier for getting EV adoption rates higher, and especially in multifamily and workplace. Economic barriers is one key issue where, based on studies we've done for other cities, it's going to cost 2 to 8 times as much to retrofit infrastructure as it is to put it into new construction or modified buildings. And there's also a whole host of practical barriers to try to retrofit something after the building has already been built, rather than to take advantage of infrastructure that's already put in place at much lower cost. So this really speaks to the need to adopt EV infrastructure building codes that are in line with state EV adoption goals, with Monterey Bay Community Power EV adoption goals.
Not only that, if I may, having just gone to a conference where this topic came up, interconnection with PG&E has gotten to be very challenging. If you need to upgrade your connection for any reason because you're exceeding the capacity or whatever, you could be waiting months, if not years, before you get their attention on that. Have you run into that problem?
So there can be an issue if it's, like just adding a few charging circuits. That's typically not an issue for PG&E, but yeah, if there's a significant installation, then that can run into interconnection issues with PG&E just based on the scale and what kind of infrastructure happens to be there. And with the EV infrastructure codes, all of the electrical infrastructure is already sized to support EV charging. So the panels are there. No one has to upgrade their panel and then go to PG&E and say, do I have permission to upgrade this panel? And then maybe have to wait for PG&E to do a study.
Right.
If the load is high enough. So that's all baked in to new construction with the EV infrastructure building code. So thanks. That's a great question. So we've been busy, and again, with the support of the Monterey Bay Air Resources District, and we've really been trying to overcome some of the barriers to local governments, because you're probably asking, okay, this is a great policy. Why aren't they already doing this? And there's just limited resources as local governments are asked to do more and more with less and less. A lot of times they don't have experience with EV infrastructure codes. They have other competing priorities on a day-to-day basis. So really the goal is for us to be a resource to help them, and then we'll also get to how you could potentially be a resource to help your communities as well. And the funding for phase 1 of the project is going to run out around the end of this month. So what have we done with this funding that we've generously received from the Air District? We've written a model code, and we've circulated that widely to everyone who has an interest. It's freely available, so happy to share with anyone on this committee who'd like to have it. We've come up with a comparison so that someone can judge that against CalGreen, because that often comes up, well, there's CalGreen, right? Why do we need this local code? So we got a great suggestion from one of our local partners, and so we created that comparison to answer that question as to why local codes are still needed, even with the state CalGreen in place. We've been doing a lot of outreach and presentations. As you can see here, so we've had 8 in-person meetings. We've had dozens of meetings on the phone with different jurisdictions, key stakeholders, lots of email traffic back and forth. We've reached out to over 3 dozen different stakeholders because we're our grant through MBARD, in which they receive funding from the California Energy Commission, is to help 3 jurisdictions adopt building codes, but we would like to expand that number drastically more than 3. So we've really been working hard at that. So this is just to kind of give you a snapshot of where different jurisdictions are. And, this is our assessment. So, for local agency, I wouldn't take it as their official word on where they're going on building codes, but a number of agencies are moving through the process. They're drafting staff reports. They've really scrutinized the model code, which is fantastic. There's 5 other jurisdictions that are reviewing the model code, and they haven't started drafting a staff report or getting all the adoption materials that they will need to move through their local adoption process. And we've also had really good discussions with lots of other agencies and staff that have an interest and they want to learn more, and they're not at the point where they're kind of engaging in, oh, here's what I need to do to move forward, here's what I would want my ordinance to potentially say. There's, I think, further opportunity to potentially engage some of those communities further and have them go from being interested to taking action. So to highlight further opportunities to move forward after the end of the phase 1 funding is, we definitely want to double the number of agencies to at least 6 from the 3 that were funded by the California Energy Commission. And so we definitely have focused on that more than we were originally had in the Energy Commission grant, so that we can get a much broader impact, spread the benefit more widely through local communities. And as part of that, we see the need for significant additional outreach and engagement, both to those folks who are moving forward and they need our help to get to the end of the process, as well as those agencies who they're reviewing the model code or they've told us that they're interested. We think there's significant potential to really engage with them and activate them to move forward. And in addition, because we spent so much more time on outreach to broaden the base of potential adopters, we haven't gone as far in terms of completing a model package that an agency could use. That you could just hand them the package and they could contact us if they wanted to customize it, or they could do it themselves with all of the various findings and reports and so on that they need for their local adoption process and for filing at the end of the day with the Building Standards Commission. And we also see the value in being available as a resource all the way to the finish line, as well as some agencies have said they would like help with stakeholder engagement to either lead that process or to support them, as they have typically an informal process of just talking with folks and getting them on board and getting feedback, and then also through a formal adoption process. So there's lots of opportunities there. And here's the potential homework assignment that I warned about. And I think that there's been some great examples of how this committee has helped local officials and policy leaders get engaged around building codes. And the best written staff report isn't going to move if there's not the local policy leadership to move forward on building codes. So I think that's an opportunity for everyone here to think about, is that something that you want to see move forward in your community if they're not on that list? Is there something we could do to help you engage? Or if you are on the list and they're moving forward, of course I'd encourage you to give your local staff a pat on the back for that. But really, I see our role as whatever we could do to help you work with local leaders to get codes moving if that's something you'd like to see in your community. And you don't see that already underway on that map that we just took a look at. In addition to getting codes adopted, I think there's a lot of opportunity for education and outreach about code and the implementation phase. And this is both for folks who adopt their own codes, and so they'll want to train stakeholders as to what's requirement, make sure their staff are up to date, have the necessary collateral materials, and kind of the process steps. And then we also see the value for education on CalGreen, even for those agencies that don't go as far as the model code for the Monterey Bay area. We still see the benefit of education to those communities because CalGreen is not consistently implemented across the state, and that's not just CalGreen, but I think energy codes in general, or environmental codes in general, sometimes don't get the same attention that structural codes or fire codes get from local officials who, maybe they feel busy, or, maybe that's not something they're as familiar with or as aware with. So I think some education and training could be very beneficial for both types of communities. And then an additional type of policy to help increase EV adoption is looking at the permit and inspection streamlining opportunities. There is a state bill, but it's focused more, the mandatory requirements are more for larger cities, not so much for smaller cities. So, it may not be something that local communities have as much on their radar if it's not something that's mandatory for them. But I think there's still an opportunity. And one thing I've heard from talking with code officials is a lot of them feel that with solar, the permitting and the inspection process is going really extremely well, that the officials know, just what's required. The folks who are applying for the permit, they understand what's needed. They know how to get that information in the format that the code officials need to process the permit and do the inspection. They know what they need to do to pass the inspection. So that's something we've done for EVs for the city of Oakland. And I think that's an additional opportunity here in the Monterey Bay Community Power area as well. If agencies, want to see, okay, how we want to be like, we want to have the EV process worked out really smoothly, just like it seems to be with solar. That's, I think, another opportunity to do here what we've done with the city of Oakland. So thanks so much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Swist, please. No, go right ahead.
Go ahead. It's more a curiosity. If the automobile industry participate in this process or co-funding, because for them, for to sell the electric cars, a lot of people don't buy it because they are afraid they cannot charge their cars. So they support this or co-financial this the construction of this infrastructure in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not aware that car companies are actually paying for infrastructure in the ground. I know they have perks so I got the Nissan Leaf and they'll pay for my charging for a year, coming down here and charging along the way, which is a nice perk. But I don't know that they're paying for the infrastructure in the ground, but they are very supportive of building codes. So when the state level building codes were updated, there were a lot of auto companies that signed on to say, yes, let's update the state building codes. There's a national building code that's going to be considered in a couple of weeks, and I think you'll see significant automaker support for those building codes. And I think there's also potential for them to engage at the local level. I don't know how much they have been engaged to date to support code adoption, but I think, if that's something that a local community wants to see, I think there's always the opportunity to ask those same folks at auto companies who are supporting like the state and the national codes, like, can you also show support at the local level as well?
I think another answer maybe to your question is that they do give substantial rebates, and that, of course, is an equitable way of giving cash back so that you can apply it towards your charging infrastructure.
Oh, that's good.
Mr. Capron.
I think that the efforts, just like the REACH codes for building electrification, the efforts for the adopt the model code across our whole area is really important in our goal of seeing large increase in electric vehicles. And I shared with you guys before that I had met with Ed and the building officials from San Benito County and Hollister and San Juan Bautista. And I'd recommend if you do that, I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but I worked through the county administrative officer, who is a member of the operations board, so he's kind of aware of what our goals are. And I think that really helped in getting the attention of the building officials and getting a meeting, getting Ed to get an appointment. So I'm very supportive of this effort.
So, of course, we endorsed this upgrading of codes, forgive me if I'm using the wrong phrase, following our November meeting, and I know that I've reported it personally to Operations Committee and the Board Committee. Is there something else that you're asking of this council? Because this is an information item here, I realize, on the agenda. We're not taking action, but can you be specific as to? Let me put it this way: Mr. Capron's suggestion is, basically go to the electeds or the administrative officers and ask them to be champions. Is that what you're asking of us?
For this committee, I think that is a great idea. So yes.
Anything else?
Yeah, let me help Ed a little bit. In addition to that, I think we are putting together a scope of work for him to help us take this process all the way to the end. We're very close to it, but that is obviously going to come with the need to provide financial support so he can go and do the work that he does.
So would it be inappropriate to ask you, will you be funding this?
Yes, we will be, of course. Yes.
Good. It wasn't clear to me, so thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Osmer.
Yeah, I did actually kind of figure from the slideshow that it was a request for money.
Yeah,
and
it was.
Yeah, and and I guess it would be nice to be able to make a recommendation on that to either the staff or the board as the community council. But I did want to say, in a related thing, I'm the executive director of Central Coast Energy Services, and it's a low income that helps low income people with their energy bills. But we have a money making arm that actually supports our low income work called 831 Conserve, and we're going to be having a big seminar at Cabrillo College May 28th on Title 24 and the new state building codes. And our 831 Conserve does home energy rating system assessments on homes, on heating and cooling systems. So it'd be a good place to promote the idea with the building officials that are there, as we've made we've got a pretty wide net on area building officials for attendance at that seminar, and we've got some great speakers. So that might be a good place to throw your card around, or if there's anything I can do.
Okay, great. I will definitely be in touch. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Pike? Mr. Habashi, I'd like to also underscore what Mr. Osmer just said. This council is looking for opportunities to make recommendations. So we appreciate presentations like this. But if you're looking for us to support or provide feedback in the way of an endorsement or not, we'd love to have these listed on the agenda as action items. I hope I'm speaking for everyone on the council when I say that, because we can easily take recommendation votes. We're very efficient at that.
Yeah, we'll keep that in mind. I know that for this time around, that we did not have the scope of work clearly defined, and the only thing that Ed was asking for is certain funding all the way to September 31st, so no clear understanding of what happens after that, and what's the extent of the work that we would like him to do. And I did ask Beth and asked him if we can get that scope of work together. This way we can have a single contract that will take us to the end of the work that needs to be done. So,
Very
and
good.
that's in the works. When it's all done, be glad to bring it to you for recommendations.
Well, and of course, we appreciate that, and we don't want you, I mean, the way you work in bringing things to us in a timely way, we don't ever want to lose that either. So we'd hate to see this get hung up on process, that we wouldn't see something like this for another month or two.
No, not to
because
worry.
his contract's running out at the end of this month anyhow. So please don't hold things up. Continue to bring these to us in a timely way.
I will.
So, yes. So, Mr. Pike, just in case, you're welcome to sit down, but we'll see if we have any public comment on this topic. I think it's item 8. Receiving the update on the energy solutions, EV infrastructure building codes. Any public comment? Excellent. Thank you again, Mr. Pike, very much for being here. And we're going to move on to item 9 next, but before we do, let's take a brief 5 to 10 minute break for everybody, okay? Remember, the microphones are still on.
Streaming.
Thank you for the break. Let's reconvene. If you need to carry on a conversation, please do, but take it outside. And so we'll pick up where we left off on item number 9. And I apologize, to everyone here. Our meetings go on for a while. I want to make sure everyone's comments are heard. And this is an important topic. We're going to receive a recap from the Director of Communications and Energy Programs, Mr. Killigrew, on the March 30th, 2019 Energy Programs Workshop that many of you were able to attend. Those of you that were, we're glad you could join us, and if you weren't, we certainly understand. But there will be another one in October that we'll talk about. So, Mr. Killigrew, this is important. We want to hear about this, but I also want my council to know this is also their opportunity to talk and provide some of their feedback as well, because we didn't do that before. So you may be interrupted a few times and you may have a few questions, but I'd like to start by saying I thought it was an excellent workshop, and I compliment you and all of your staff because it was our first, and you did such an excellent job of pulling that off. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Byron. Definitely a team effort, and I can't thank enough for the advisory council members who attended, as well as the community members. There was a lot of kind of outreach that was done. There are definitely areas for improvement, and I think for the first time out of the gate, it was a solid effort, and we're definitely going to improve and make sure the next one's even more impactful. So again, this is a workshop recap. We had, I think, a whopping 4 days to kind of pull everything together. So I wanted to acknowledge our team here. Spent a fair amount of time just looking through surveys, looking through all the notes, and trying to synthesize everything. So I can't thank them enough for helping to bring this forward to you so quickly on such a condensed time frame. So the principle around the workshop, as everybody knew, is we wanted to figure out other opportunities to engage the community around programs and the opportunities that Monterey Bay Community Power brings. The idea was to have 2 workshops, one kind of in North County, as we could call it, one potentially in South County. So that's why we picked the city of Watsonville for this first one. And we're looking at the city of Salinas for the second one on October 12th. Again, as I mentioned, the goal was to solicit input and feedback from the community around energy programs. We put together a pretty slick flyer, I felt like. Definitely Pop kind of spoke to distributed energy resources, EV infrastructure, as well as hopefully the built environment. So it was a nice little win to have that. And hopefully we're going to replicate that even further, unless there's additional thoughts or feedback about our graphic design. So we'll fully take that as well. Some quick stats, including staff, board representatives. We had 50 representatives. I do want to say that the outreach that was done, like there was almost 17,000 people that were kind of reached through different social media realms, which I think is pretty impressive. There are a fair amount of shares through Facebook. We actually did some targeted outreach to the MB Prime customers. We now have email a list to a lot of our, pretty much all the customers that have email addresses, but we wanted to reach out for the folks who've done MB Green Plus, MB Share, MB Prime, and give them a personal invitation and kind of acknowledge their leadership in adopting 100% renewable energy, as well as reinvesting their rebate back in the community. Did a few things around advocates, newsletters, the Monterey County Weekly. I think the interesting fact that we did is we did a Facebook Live for this, which allows us to use Facebook to, stream this on social media. Whether or not you like Facebook or not is another question, but it's another avenue that folks can watch the workshop in perpetuity because it now lives on our website and folks can share it out and it becomes an ongoing educational process. So to date, I think we already have 150 views. Again, we can't figure out whether people are watching it multiple times, but if you take the 50 people who attended, call it 150 views, let's say we reach 200 folks, and I think that's a pretty successful number. Again,
I have to say, I really doubt people are watching that multiple times. It was wasn't it like 3 hours long, 4 hours long? Go ahead, do you have a question?
Yes, I actually went to the Facebook to watch live, but the audio was not so good. Just as an observation.
What was wrong? What was wrong?
It was very not loud. How you say? Quiet. Yeah.
So there you go. There's add to your budget. Invest in a good camera now. They walked around with an iPad. That's how they were Facebooking it. Is that a verb?
You can do with the iPad, but if you have a good microphone to.
Yeah, that's why I got my notepad right now. Yeah. Well, we also had a workshop survey that I think out of the 50 folks, there were 25 participants. Again, this took a ton of time for our team to basically scrub through those 25 surveys and kind of extract some information. So again, I just wanted to highlight all the questions that we asked, and I'm just going to go through a few of them because I thought those were of kind of a strategic importance, but I'm not going to read them out, but it was kind of a way to capture some additional input from the participants. This was an interesting one. Again, when you're thinking about the folks in the room, when you ask them a question, how often do you think about electricity? As you can see, it's pretty profound that like only when I turn my light on or charge my phone or something like that. It's not an integral part of your life in the way that we would like people to start moving forwards with. So it's just an interesting takeaway here. What is most valuable to you as a customer? So this is kind of mirroring some of our JPA goals with some of our efforts that are moving forward. And it was a pretty interesting kind of mixture around the line where you got 33% looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, lower electricity rates, and then local control over electricity generation. Some of the kind of key takeaways is local energy programs. So it was a nice kind of mixture across the board. There wasn't just one potential item that kind of stole the show. What potential MBC programs do you value the most? Again, kind of synthesizing some of the ones that the audience could kind of sink their teeth into, whether solar, electric vehicles, switching to heat pumps, bill credit, as well as battery storage, charging electric vehicles, and then increasing net surplus compensation. So again, a kind of a nice mixture of across-the-board programs that folks were interested in.
Which one was the 32%?
That looks like
battery storage.
Battery storage.
Okay, thank you.
This was a tricky one to kind of articulate or at least put together visually. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we asked them, rank 1 to 4. What are your most priorities? 1 being the most, 4 being the least. For surplus revenue, as you can see, profound. Most people want the funds to go towards programs with reserves and rebates in equal fashion. So I don't think that's surprising to anyone. In terms of I wanted to walk through each of the breakout sessions. And again, I just want to commend our staff for synthesizing the notes, but I just wanted to acknowledge board member Stedman for being a part and facilitating this breakout session. Pretty much the key takeaways were looking at the need for standardizing bus and vehicle charging options, encouraging adoption of electric trucks, As you heard from Ed earlier, improving codes and access. There are some ideas about subsidizing charging in public lots and workplaces. Financial assistance for underrepresented groups is a priority. And then consider how to encourage students or first-time car buyers to buy EVs, make them EV buyers for life. And then this one was interesting. It was just ideas that came out. Ask hybrid owners to donate their hybrid to a low-income family in return for a deeper incentive off of a new battery electric vehicle. Building electrification, sorry, Seth and Norm, I know they left. We didn't have a great glamour shot of you two, but Councilmember Capron and Councilmember Groot facilitated a really wonderful breakout session around building electrification. It was great to have a lot of differing views about building electrification, and I felt like it was a hearty conversation about what to do with the existing building stock as well as new building stock. Some key takeaways are, what are the opportunities to identify sites to do model programs or model like showcase demonstration projects where people could go and kind of live and breathe inside of an electric home or a business. Also establish finance mechanisms to support building electrification. And I think the big takeaway was how can MBCP become a conduit for information and education for the community, contractors, as well as appliance dealers? How can we facilitate and get information and disseminate information out so that people feel empowered, they have adequate information to make a decision? It was interesting enough, I'm not going to name a name, but there was a particular board member who was actually remodeling his house and actually went to their contractor and said, hey, what about electric appliances? And the contractor said, you don't want to do that. Don't worry about it. So, and again, the board member was, I didn't know any better to, respond back and say, no, I want you to look at electric appliances. So I think stories like that kind of give us opportunity to think about, we can provide incentives and cash, injections around programs, but there's still a tremendous amount of education that needs to be done. I think the one other note I wanted to mention was the balance between gas cooking and induction cooking, and there are a lot of diehard cooks who will not leave natural gas. So some ideas were around, potentially doing some cooking demonstration projects or opportunities to show the benefits of induction cooking that can supersede gas cooking.
Sure.
If I could interrupt real quick, Chair, I didn't see heating on here.
And that's the big issue.
Why, yeah. Do you know why that?
And again,
that's got to be the biggest majority of energy use, right?
We did talk about new technologies for space heating and water heating. It was a big part of our discussion, and how those technologies have arrived. They're cost effective, and that's a lot of what the education piece is about. And the other thing that we talked about that's also kind of the education piece is the REACH codes, and the demonstration projects we can do can have a big effect because people are so ignorant about these new technologies. But ultimately, if we can't change the building codes, we're not going to really move the needle. And I think there's a role for Monterey Bay Community Power in reaching out to the jurisdictions on that.
And then the last two elements, just highlighting, with that education, resource materials for the planning department, so that when folks do come in, there's opportunities to educate there. And then additionally, making sure that we're partnering, or at least chatting with affordable and private housing developers to make sure that if they're doing retrofits or they're bringing on new units, that they are fully electrified. The distributed energy resources breakout session. This was a really productive conversation. I think at the end of the day, there weren't as many kind of wonderful takeaways as we may have imagined just out of that conversation. I think it's highly complex. There are a lot of variables in it. But I think at the end of the day, the big takeaway was ensuring that if we're looking at expanded, distributed energy resources, whether it's a microgrid or storage, is that we find a way to balance, the commercial needs, whether it's, big industry with residential needs, and not forgetting about that we do have a chunk of customers that could, residential customers that can benefit from it. Using distributed energy resources as a resilience measure, and then making sure that they're available to all customers. And then there was a great idea about potentially looking at the pumped hydro storage between Nacimiento and San Antonio lakes. And then the underrepresented communities breakout session, this was kind of an additional add-on that we wanted to make sure we could have a time to discuss, folks from walks of life that always don't get a seat at the table in terms of this conversation. So a lot of the big takeaways were partnerships, making sure we're reaching out to the Spanish-speaking community, incorporating Native involvement and local indigenous participation. And what I thought was a really interesting idea was creating local ambassadors or promotores, I misspelled that, sorry, to further drive in, information, support youth partnerships, partner with school districts, and then work with contractors, affordable housing developers to support sustainable housing. And this was a nice little shot at the end. You've got a couple key board members. And I just want to, again, extend our appreciation to everybody who attended. This was our first time out of the gate. I felt like it was a successful run, but there's lots of room for improvement to make sure that each one can kind of take on its own identity in the sense of what we want to accomplish this one. I think we set some pretty high marks of trying to cover everything in a short amount of time. But I think overall it was successful. I think we did a good first run, and I welcome any questions or thoughts or considerations or areas of improvement.
Good, and I'll add to that. I'd like members to feel free to make their comments that were able to attend, and those that weren't able to attend, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please feel free to do that, because it was worthwhile, and we want to make sure we have a little discussion around this. Mr. Capron.
I think a lot of times these kind of workshop events end up just being sort of window dressing, and I was really impressed. The staff did an amazing job, and we got an amazing turnout, and it was very substantive what went on, so I thought it was a huge success.
Thank you.
Please.
One of the questions that it came up a lot was there's a lot of people renting and they're not interested in solar or EVs, and I was wondering how can we change that, because we need to take care of our climate. So I just want to comment on that.
I think I'd like to piggyback on that first.
Go right ahead.
Thank you for creating that day. I wish I was there. I was on call for like 24 hours plus at the hospital. I guess with the educational component, it sounds like you guys learned a lot. But with the awareness component within the community, how many people, do we have any data saying how many people actually know about Monterey Bay Community Power?
Great question. And I think that's worthwhile as we move towards doing a customer survey. I think we'll be able to get a little better sense of that, but I think that's a very reasonable statistics to try to strive for. Is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it 75%? Is it 100? I think, and it's an interesting, I always thought about that in the same vein of a climate action plan. Like how many, you go into a city, how many folks in the city know the city has a climate action plan? That's their guiding vessel towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we're one of the mechanisms that gets there. So I think it's duly noted that we'll try to figure out ways to be able to quantify that somehow, some way.
I think you and I sometimes speak the same language. I'd like to just speak briefly about, does everybody here know about the Green New Deal, about the federal movement? I think everybody here would know that, right? I also think that most people here would know about Senate Bill 100 and Governor Brown, right? But most people don't know that. And when I talk to my community members, most people don't know about Monterey Bay Community Power.
Yeah.
But I do want to pay homage to Senator De Leon and Governor Brown for signing Senate Bill 100 into effect now, which means that California is not only like creating policy about the Green New Deal per se, but actually implementing it. And that's what I think that we're doing. And because we have such a powerful federal kind of public relations tool with regards to the Green New Deal, it's not going to happen on the federal level at this point. But I feel like California does have that. And I feel like I wish we could market ourselves as that. Because I think you'll get a lot more people aware really quickly that California, the 5th largest economy in the world, 40 million people, is trying to create that now.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
I wanted to also piggyback on Horacio's comments. The issue about equity and reaching out to underserved communities. I mean, I really support the way we're doing that with our EV incentives. We kind of get a double benefit when we if those benefits are going to go to someone, if they go to a low-income family, it not only helps the environment, but there's a social justice component. We talked about that at our building electrification breakout, and it's really challenging with rental units because typically the renter is paying the electric bill and the gas bill, and the owner is not. And so the owner doesn't have an incentive to do the electrification that we want them to do because they're not going to realize the benefits from the lower bills. And that I don't think we have an answer to that at this point, but I think that's a problem that we want to pursue going forward, finding answers to that.
I'd like to also add the challenge that you represented in terms of the awareness. I was just realizing, you may all remember the bill inserts that used to come from your PG&E bill. There used to be a little newsletter every month, and they found that nobody was reading them. They were just tossing them. So they don't do them anymore because it costs a lot of money to do that. So it's really a challenge. People just don't even look at their bills.
But not necessarily like the bill, but like the CCA at large and people like us to kind of own the Green New Deal in California. Just relabel the Green New Deal in actuality today in California. I think that'll ring a bell in perception management for us, and we'll get a lot of young people. Everybody who's young knows about the Green New Deal, that's something that we're hoping to get to on a federal level, whereas we are actually implementing that on a state level. And I want us to kind of possibly think about that in the future of how can we just like label it the California Green New Deal that we're implementing. I don't know why there's any possible barriers to that.
Well, the challenge may be that there's positive aspects of that branding and negative aspects of that brand.
But it is reflective of what we are living in.
Mm-hmm.
So and I don't think that we should be fearful in California to kind of speak loudly about what we're actually doing.
Okay, having said that, I see Mr. Shaw. Did you want to say something? You don't have to.
No, I just want to keep us focused on the Community Advisory Council's workshop and the results that came out of that before we venture too far off into a different discussion that's not agendized.
That's fair enough. I guess the only thing that how I can connect that would be that I think we'd have a lot more people who are being educated if we had a little better connection to the outreach component.
Mr. Osmer.
So I had a few items, and I think it was a good first start. It was a good start in these kind of events, and I actually would rather have that we had talked about it a little before so that we could offer some input prior to the event. And certainly the same, we've got some time before the October event, and hopefully that there'd be some, localization in terms of what the agenda is and how things are presented. I think the big thing for me was there was a lot of the faithful there. We were there, the staff was there, there were a lot of familiar faces there. And in a lot of ways, I think in terms of programs, the faithful are a minority. And trying to get some idea of what people actually need and think is the best at a different level is really important for programs because, and I'm extremely, I run utility programs and state and federal programs, and I'm very, very frustrated at the lack of responsiveness and the consistent design that is made at the state level, at a meeting room, at the PUC, or in some office in one of the utilities that is not responsive and doesn't really address local needs. And I think that's a distinction that we have to keep in mind, is that we have a chance to do some new programs away from those static and very stagnant designs of programs that are out there. And I think one big thing is that that is a real easy thing to fall into as we talk to people in the community, and not so much to the faithful, but to the community. There's a lot of jargon. There's a huge amount of jargon that's used. You know, when I first saw the agenda, I actually stumbled at electrification. You know, the first thing that came to mind was that, you know, the Rural Electrification Administration in the 30s. The second thing was it had something to do with the death penalty. But you know, it's something that is, but it's something that you have to say, hey, what's electrification? Because, you know, I think it's a big gap. What is it? Same thing for underrepresented communities. And you know, and I have to say, as a term of art in politics, underrepresented went out a long time ago. Now we have disadvantaged communities, we have low-income communities, we have a lot of other new names for this. But in terms of a program, when we go to design a program for the underrepresented communities, who are we talking about? And the slide, of course, the slide that was shown right after the introduction of the idea of unrepresented communities was poverty level by county. So, you know, is it people who are in poverty that we are targeting? And what's the underrepresented, you know, what's the underrepresented community? You know, Estonians without visiting visas, or, you know, what is it that it actually means, so that we can focus our efforts. And I think there was, you know, I would have preferred to see a lot more focus on what programs are possible, and trying to get people to appreciate just that aspect. You know, the goal was not education. But I think there's a drive. We have a feeling that we have to educate everybody about Monterey Bay Community Power. And in some ways, I'm not sure it's absolutely necessary, but in terms of what are you going to get out of it? What are the things that it can do for you that we can then focus on to engage people in what we do? Because, you know, a lot of people simply don't care, you know. And I mean, when you look at that slide that shows that some people thought it was a good idea for MBCP to increase their reserves, I was trying to figure out if that was, you know, the same number of staff that were there, or how do you count? Because I know very few people who think that's an issue for any organization from the community. So there's a lot of things that I think we have to, you know, really hone in on and make sure that we've got, we're able to communicate with people on a level that they can understand. And I think we need to target the audience. The whole distributed energy resources breakout, I thought was a little bit somewhat disingenuous, in that there's already a program going. It doesn't target, it targets a certain amount of people already, and for the person off the street, even for most of the faithful, it's not something that there's a huge amount of latitude that we have, or relevance that those kind of projects have to people who walk into the meeting room. So you know, I think it was good overall, and I certainly, it certainly made me think of a whole lot of different aspects of programs and what we're facing. You know, one thing that jumped out at me was that we, and in my business, we have a challenge in terms of electrification with low-income households. Are we talking about, you know, replacing natural gas appliances and increasing costs with electricity, with electrical appliances for low-income people. Is that a reasonable thing to do in the short term? And how do we address that? But as we look at electrification, we have to recognize that not everybody's going to drive a Tesla. Is that we've got to pay attention to what the immediate impacts are for those people who, you know, essentially can hardly afford to even live in the area. So I think there was a lot of great ideas thrown around, but I hope it's a little bit, it's more focused and really relates a lot more to people in the community that will be served by our programs.
Mr. Osmer, thank you very much for your thoughtful comments. That's a great review and critique. Ms. Whist.
Yes, it's very interesting what you were talking about, because I also thought about that. You know, who was present in this workshop? You know, we're not people who are already educated and want more information, deeper information about it. And because this week I had a breakfast with a community leader, actually one person who works very much for San Benito County to be part of Monterey Bay Community Power. And it was very interesting. We went to the in front of the church to get signature. I mean, she really did a wonderful job. And she explained everything very simple, using a very simple vocabulary, because if not, people don't really understand. And they lose the interest, you know. And I think it's very important for us to understand that not everybody knows what we know, right? So I just want to say that it's a very good point.
So I'm glad you brought these topics up. One of the things that I wanted to tell you was that our vice chairman, chairwoman, Ms. Levon, is going to be organizing an ad hoc group to coordinate and plan for the October workshop. And she's obviously not here today, but asked if I would let you all know this so you can think about it, because I know that she'll want to organize that come next meeting. So you can certainly contact her beforehand and let her know that you'd be interested in serving on it. She'd love to hear from you, and that would be an ad hoc committee. So there's so that we can include staff, for instance, Mr. Killigrew or someone from your staff to be on that, and other members of the community that would be helpful in being better prepared for the next workshop. So I hope that helps address the concern to the extent we can. We need to keep working on this. I'm sure perfection will never be attained, but we should keep trying. So I really hope that you'll consider participating in that with the vice chair. She will be heading up that ad hoc committee. I think that's the right term, isn't it? Ad hoc committee? Ad hoc group?
Well, two things. One, I would caution if you want to express your interest to the vice chair, that you do so through the clerk of the board, just to avoid any potential Brown Act issues related to reply all emails and things of that nature.
So you mean to tell me they cannot call her or send her an email saying they'd like to be on her committee?
You certainly can. There becomes an issue potentially whenever there is a quorum. So when the contacts become become 7 or more, there's potentially a quorum.
We'll make sure there's no quorum, but and don't hit the reply all. But I want to make sure you're all free to contact me or the vice chair at any time. That's why I'm pushing back on this.
I caution all of you with respect to the Brown Act that to the extent that you can't control the communications of email once they're out there and who's replying to them and how the conversation can grow, the course of action, the best practice would be to express your interest through the vice chair, and once an ad hoc committee of less than a quorum for a set objective would be established, then those communications can occur.
Can I? Robert, I just remembered the last meeting I mentioned that I received email from Bran and, shared that in the Facebook, and I have been sharing information about Monterey Bay Community Power, and you said, oh, I will get information about this is not a if this is allowed or not.
Yeah, like anything, the electronic communications live on forever. It's tough to control those conversations, but sharing information on Facebook when it's not with a quorum of the rest of the committee, or you're engaging or furthering in a discussion with the rest of the committee, would not be a violation of the Brown Act.
Okay.
I think as a matter of process, committees are usually formed by the board, and also in doing that, bringing the idea to the board is it's agendized, and then everybody knows it's coming, and then people can announce their interest in public. And so I think that's a much better way of doing it.
So we actually did try and nail this down before this meeting, and I think we came up with ad hoc group. Is that correct?
I think Mr. Ossermer's the question is a little bit differently, and I think he's correct, and it's the process that I understood, that at the next Community Advisory Committee meeting, that there would be an agendized item for the appointment of an ad hoc committee for the distinct purpose of planning for the next Community Advisory Committee workshop. So I think, Mr. Osmer, the organizational structure that you laid out is exactly the one that we would be following.
So it will be on the agenda.
Yes.
We are not taking any action today, however. So, Mr. Killigrew, you've been very patient. Are there more comments on this topic?
Just briefly, I just want to applaud Dennis's thoughtful comments. That was helpful. I think that the notion of getting a less involved citizen to come to our workshops, that would be fantastic. I think it's a huge challenge to accomplish that, so I hope we come up with some strategies.
Mr. Stedman.
If I may add to that, it wasn't all the converted. I know there was one woman that joined our group and said, I do not want to see any electric vehicles on the road. So she'd rather us buy a Toyota that her mechanic could work on. And I'm sure she said similar things in the other groups. But I think it all gets back to, great job, excellent staff work. But, it gets out to public outreach. Being out in the community to get those folks involved, sponsoring events, and maybe they're not so related to the discussion topics we had, but just to let people know you're out there. It must be difficult for a utility to make a lot of friends out there. And so you have to be very deliberate about how you go about that, and that's in your outreach and communications, as JR knows. And I'm sure it will only get better as more people find out about it. But I would say as you go along, to try to keep a tally of ideas and agenda items that may come up for these workshops, and let people know that we will be having workshops in the future. But I also see this agency as charged with, no pun intended, with developing some of these policies and programs ahead of time. If you leave it up to the public, they're not going to really come up with, and they can come up with good ideas, I suppose, but especially people that don't know much about a lot of the issues going on. So it's nice to integrate them and involve them so that we have a framework upon which we can build in the future.
Mm-hmm. Good comments. Any other comments before I turn to the public? Mr. Killigrew, thank you once again. And we are on item number 9. Any members of the public wish to comment?
Kevin Dayton with Clear Honest Options and Clean Energy. I was at the workshop. I'll give you my perspective on it as somebody who represents business and ratepayer interests. First, I think the reason why nothing really new came out is because this agency is doing a good job of advancing its mission and vision, and there shouldn't have been any big surprises at it because you're already working on these plans, and I think in many cases, using the best models available to do things. I will agree also, it seemed like a lot of the people who were there as participants were familiar, and people who go to all these events and to go into the discussions, it was pretty much, I think a lot of people there already knew everything that was being said. So, there are a few good ideas here and there, but it was basically reiteration of what's trending out there in terms of energy. Now, regarding inviting people from the public, I'll be honest with you on this. I definitely, when I go to meetings like that, although I'm comfortable with it, I know that ideologically it's going to be leaning somewhat to the left. And I think some people are afraid of going to these meetings and saying, it's going to be full of a bunch of activists, and this is not something I really want to go to. I like what's going on with the outreach to the business groups. I think that some people who aren't as big into some of the energy activism are more comfortable in that kind of format. So I'm not sure that you're going to change it. Regarding comments that we need to promote this as the Green New Deal and things like that, I want to remind you that there is actually a wide diversity of perspectives, ideological perspectives about the role of government and things like that, and you have to be careful about that sort of thing. And I'll show you the chart here, concerns about government-run power agency as one of the reasons why people opt out. And, you're not fooled. A lot of people don't even know they're in Monterey Bay Community Power, and they haven't really had a chance to opt out of it. But you have at least a core group of people who say, I'm uncomfortable about what is essentially government takeover of the electric supply. I think you need to be careful about how you market it. There's a lot of positive things that this group is doing here. And to start saying this is the Green New Deal is basically saying, we're going to adopt democratic socialism for your electricity. I think you have to be careful about that. You're doing great things right now with what you're doing, and don't try to turn it into some sort of ideological crusade. That's my advice to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to comment? Sir, would you mind identifying yourself?
Sure. My name's Rob Nicely, and I'm a general contractor, and I was at that meeting as well.
I know, and I can't believe it. I mean, you were a valuable contributor to that meeting. I'm so
thanks.
glad you're here. And here you are sitting through this meeting, so thank you.
So I came here to listen to you guys, but I wanted to say one thing about the meeting, and with regard to whether or not the people that show up or they're converted already, whether or not that minimalizes the utility of that meeting, I don't know, but I will say that when I saw that flyer, I was so happy that there was going to be a format where I was going to get to interact with you all, and the fact that that format exists is, in my mind, very, very important and a wonderful thing. I'm so glad that I live in a community where that is happening. So I am one of the converted, but I was looking forward extremely to having the opportunity to share the things that I wanted to say with you all. So I don't see that as mitigating the utility of having something like that. I was very much looking forward to the opportunity to interact with you all and say my piece. So I think it's a wonderful format. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Nicely.
Can I say something?
Certainly.
I just want to clarify that I think it's important to have that kind of meeting, but to educate other people. And I think it's important for us to discuss and to learn more about it. Every day I'm learning more about it. But as he said, if we want to achieve other people who really doesn't know very much, maybe we have to go to, I don't know, in front of church or community or farmer market or, schools, whatever. This is what I think. Okay.
Which the staff does a lot of already.
Okay, thank you. We're in the comments from the public, please?
Yes. Michael Saint, again with Campaign for Sustainable Transportation. I love all the comments here. Referring back to Councilman Osmar there. It's just in general, our citizens are apathetic about this type of thing. We have turnouts of 30 to 40% at our elections. And like you say, we see the same suspects at all these advocacy things that I do and show up to. Our CFST had 2 presentations, one at the end of March, which was a climate change concert. We had about 35 people. And 33 were people that we all knew, and they were in advocacy groups, and we basically just had a party for being in a group, you know. So there's 2 people I didn't recognize at that. And my co-chair said, well, you know, but we did the advertising. These things showed up in the good times. We put out flyers and stuff, and people at least saw our name out there and what we were trying to do. So he had a very positive outlook to that. We just had another one at Aptos Library last weekend. I personally handed out about 400 flyers, went to the Cabrillo Farmers Market and talked to people there. It was in the Aptos Times, it was on Nextdoor, and on, and 13 people showed up. But the positive thing was 10 of them I had never seen before. So the percentage was very good. There weren't the same suspects at that time. So just keep the course, keep going out there and asking people to show up to these things. And I think it's going to work out really good. And you guys are all going in the right direction, and that's why the CAC is here. Your goals are not like other big groups. You don't have the money issue. You're not trying to make a lot of money. You're trying to help people, and that's the key. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other members of the public? Thank you all. I see another coming. I'm sorry, come to the microphone, please.
Oh, yeah. Just wanted to compliment, this is Dave Lessicar again. Wanted to compliment one of the comments that Mr. Hartman made regarding that, you know, people who aren't in a position to be philanthropic are not about to switch to electric appliances and heat when it's going to cost them more money. So that's why I think that Mr. Hibachi's longer-term goal of providing electricity at the lowest possible rate is crucial.
Okay, thank you. I think you're attributing those comments to Mr. Osmer.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not taking credit.
Or blame.
No, that's okay. We're just correcting that it was, I believe, Mr. Osmer that you were referring to his comments.
It was in the lineup.
It's the signs of
okay,
which
I
you
missed, yes.
look a lot
I'm
alike.
sorry, Mr. Osmer.
So
I'm
we're
sorry.
not contradicting you. I'm just correcting
no,
the.
I appreciate the correction.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of the public wish to comment on that? Okay, seeing none, I think we're on item 10. Oh, yes. And that is a quarterly update on customer outreach and engagement. And it doesn't say who's presenting on that one, but I have a feeling I know who it is. Welcome back, Mr. Killigrew.
Thank you again, Chair Byron. It's been a long time. Quick update. Big takeaway, we're still steady at about 97% of our accounts, about 96% of the eligible demand, so we're looking strong. We're enrolling about 4,000 net energy metering customers this month. Snapshot by community. Again, the purple is designated for Monterey County, the kind of tealish greens for San Benito, and then that's navy blue for Santa Cruz, and then the outlined is our overall service enrollment. Again, don't kill me for don't humor me for the colors. They were random. There's no affinity between the 3 counties, so it's just a quick snapshot.
But still, 97.32% is very good. Okay.
Solid, yep. Again, it's always good to share enrollment stats within the customer classes. So again, a little over 97% for residential, 97% around commercial, a little lower on agriculture just because you have a lot less accounts. So if you do have some key agricultural customers who leave with 50 accounts, it has more of an impact. Care and Farah, it's pretty solid. I've actually seen other CCAs that have 10 to 15% of Care and Farah customers opted out because they're scared that they'll lose their discount. So I think that's something good to know, that Care and Farah customers who definitely have discounts are benefiting from our program and not departing and going back to PG&E and actually spending more. So that's
Do you
a good
attribute
thing.
that to awareness or an education or just they didn't realize that they're signed in?
Honestly, it's probably a mixture of both. I mean, we are doing a lot more trying to just get the word out in general about things, and I think with stakeholders like yourself to be able to carry the message, it is going to be able to be disseminated more effectively. Medical baseline, again, that's kind of an area that we'll want to keep a more close eye on and start reaching out to those customers. But then I'm just blown away that 99% of the net energy metering customers are enrolled. I've seen some other CCAs where 25% have opted out in that customer class. So it's good. It's a good thing. More importantly, MB Prime, we're seeing a good spike in MB Prime enrollments. I think with our great giveaway last month for the e-bike, I think we had something like another 20 or 30 MB Prime opt-ups. So it was
And
a nice
remind
thing.
us, NB Prime is the 100% renewables.
Yes, correct. For a penny more per kilowatt hour, you can support 100% renewable energy. And we are seeing a nice uptick in MB Share and MB Green Plus enrollments. Again, continual feedback. I will update recently, but there's actually been a switch, and it's more kind of aligned with billing, service issues, rate concerns than so much being automatically enrolled. I'm not really sure why, but there's kind of a weird switch that's happening, and we're trying to watch that effectively. But again, bulk of the customers are in Monterey County because that's where the most of the customers are. Again, heading into year 2, looking at evolving our message, differentiating ourselves, making sure we become a valued, trusted resource, continually opportunities to collaborate, and then always efforts around understanding your bill. We had a nice video that we helped produce, so that's online. You can share with your constituents about that. It kind of walks through the bill in a more fun way. And then the lessons learned from this past enrollment that we can take on to San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay and make that even more successful. Again, our outreach are all about looking at more highly strategic, high value events, leveraging memberships and sponsorships. Again, engagement with underserved community or disadvantaged community. I know Alexis has been doing amazing work with our agricultural outreach. It's now becoming, all the other CCAs are now looking at that kind of community outreach program because no other CCAs is working with someone like La Tricolor, the radio station, to do targeted outreach to farm workers. I mean, it's a really great story, and we're trying our as hard as we can to reach customers like that as well. We're going to have a brand new website in the early part of June. It is beautiful, and we use Shipper Design. They're a local web design company, so we're really excited about that. This is a big thing that we're pushing right now, just in terms of working with key industries right now, whether it's agriculture, hospitality, healthcare, the public sector. We're really trying to make sure that we keep tabs on those key industries and make sure we understand what they need, what they want from us, and just establishing that relationship. So that's really kind of moving along pretty well. Again, around programs, we're doing a lot of additional engagement around those key sectors, just to make sure that we can get as much input we can for this next round of programs for our roadmap. And so it's really, we're just in a good place right now. Again, we could always look to do more, but I think we're doing an amazing job, considering we've been in operation for a good almost 14 months now. So, and I'll take any questions.
Good. I'd really like to hear if there's any comments, particularly with regard to the community outreach efforts on the part of the council. But comment on anything. Ms. Wolfram.
JR, I had a question about MB Prime. How are you seeing the breakout? Is that mostly residential, or are there other businesses?
I can't tell you who, but
No,
until
I
they
don't know who.
come forth. But we're starting to see some small businesses are, and I think that's promising.
Thank you.
Maybe encourage them to use it as part of their position, their branding, if you will. Any other comments?
That was my question.
Mr. Amisqueda?
Do you know if MBCP participated on the Ciclovia?
The bike to work?
Every city has a Ciclovia where nobody uses cars, they just walk and use the bike.
I'm not aware of that, but I'm sorry. I know it's late, but I lived in Bolivia for 6 months, and I remember when the whole city of Cochabamba, I think it's 400,000 people, it shut down, and there were no cars on the street except for emergency services. But I'm not aware of that here.
Yeah, they're doing it in King City last Sunday, and then they're going to go to Gonzales, and then they're going to go to Soledad, and then Salinas.
So what, are you suggesting that's a good day to take advantage of increased awareness about MBCP?
Yeah, everybody just walks, and nobody uses cars and uses bikes.
What's the name?
Ciclovia.
Ciclovia.
Right.
Mr. Stedman?
I thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just say that we participate in the Air District, but it's not everybody that doesn't. It's usually just downtown Salinas area, for instance, and we've set up a booth there on occasion, and we'd be happy to discuss teaming up with Monterey Bay Community Power as well. And I know it's starting to spread, but we'd love it if the entire county decided not to drive vehicles that day and rode bikes. That might be
or at least one day a week,
yeah,
maybe.
That would be great.
JR, I don't know if you're aware of the green business certification program in all the counties. I mean, maybe they could add that to their criteria is signing up for MB Prime.
That's a good suggestion.
Any other comments, questions? I think we're beginning to grow weary.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Killigrew. We'll ask if there's any members of the public that would like to comment on this item. Forgive me, I want to make sure I get the right number. Number 10 on the agenda. All right, seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move to item 11, and this is a update on the MBCP programs, and it looks as though Ms. Trenchard will be presenting.
Good evening. I missed you last month, so I have a big update for you.
We saved up. That's why we're going so long tonight.
I'll go as fast as I can, I promise.
No, please don't.
All right. All right, I'm going to start with Project Sunshine just to kind of cheer us all up. Project Sunshine launched early in March. If you'll recall, the goal is to install 20 solar systems on single-family affordable housing. We want 9 in Monterey, 7 in Santa Cruz County, and 4 in San Benito County. We've installed 6 as of April 17th. That's about $20,000 lifetime savings per customer, and 21 people were trained across those 6 installations. Whoops. Now I'm going to move to our EV program. A lot has happened since we last talked in February. Monterey Bay Community Power is going to be joining forces with Monterey Bay Air Resources District, affectionately known as MBARD, to offer $1.1 million EV incentive program that we're calling MBE VIP. The goal of this one program is to educate and build EV awareness, to reduce the acquisition cost of an EV, and ultimately to increase EV adoption. Buy Local, which is the first phase of the MBE VIP program, will launch May 1st. This is the same funding and program structure that we've been talking about for many months now. It's the same program. Once the Buy Local program ends, then the next program, the next phase, Your Choice, Your Terms, which is funded by MBARD, will launch. So the combination of the two programs really provide our customers with the most options and flexibility. So I think what I'd like to do is kind of talk to each program separately so that you can clearly distinguish from a customer perspective the difference. And then I'll kind of double click, if you will, into Buy Local and give you an update on the Monterey Bay Community Power funded program. So again, the Buy Local program, the real focus there is to get EVs sold in the Tri-County. It's about building a local awareness. It's about targeting EVs that have a low to mid-range MSRP. So you're not going to see Tesla S's or Audis or BMWs. This is about trying to get past the early adopters and really go to our general community. So the MSRP is going to hit about $35,000. It's much lower. That's the beginning point. It'll be for Monterey Bay Community Power customers only. And the unique feature of this program in particular is that you'll get a discount off MSRP from the dealer, a discount off MSRP from the manufacturer, and an incentive for Monterey Bay Community Power all at the time of purchase. So that means that when you're leasing a car, your monthly payment will be based on a lower base, or if you're financing a car, it will be based on a lower base. The other thing with the Buy Local program is that it's for new electric vehicles only, and it's going to be limited to local participating dealers. So if you contrast that with the second phase of the program, the MBARD funded program, think of that as you can choose a new EV, a used EV, new or used plug-in hybrid, hydrogen cell, electric motorcycle at any dealer in California that you want. It offers complete flexibility. We're also looking at, under review, if we have funds left from the Buy Local program, potentially adding that to an MBARD incentive for anybody who purchases locally. So that's the distinction between the two programs. Again, the first one launches May 1st. It'll end July 31st, at which point the second phase, Your Choice, Your Terms, launches with the second program funded by MBARD. So now I'm going to kind of talk just about the Local Choice program. That's the program that, again, we've been talking about for the last umpteen months. Again, it's going to launch May 1st. Right now, you'll notice I've got that as not final because I'm only sharing with you the contracts that I have in my hand. I'm hopeful that we'll get one more dealer, but as of now, I can tell you that the participating dealers will be the Greenwood Chevrolet, that's in Hollister, San Benito County. They'll have the Bolt for us. In Santa Cruz, VW Dodge Ram, they'll have the e-Golf. And then in Monterey County, we have Cardinelli Nissan. The cars that you're going to see that we've got signed up for now include the Nissan Leaf, which is also their new extended Leaf with a 220-mile range. We've got the Chevy Bolt at 238-mile range. And then the e-Golf is in a 125-mile range. So I know that this is a complicated chart. Let me walk you through it. What I'm trying to show you is what will the customer experience when they try and lease a car. Let me explain the chart. The first two columns there are what an income qualified customer is going to pay for a leased vehicle. The next two categories, the next two columns are public agencies. That's again schools, nonprofits, public agencies. And then the last two columns are for anybody who doesn't fit in those prior two columns. And if you start at the top, you start with that starting MSRP. That's the MSRP that the dealer will be offering for that vehicle. Then you go down to the dealer discount. That's what the dealer will be offering off that MSRP. And you'll notice that's the same for every customer group.
Is that what you negotiated?
Yes. Then there's a manufacturer discount. That's also negotiated. And then you have the Monterey Bay Community Power incentive added on top of that. So when you look at the time of lease for an income qualified individual looking at a Chevy Bolt, that comes in at about, give or take, $25,000, which is about 34% off of the original MSRP. Then you add on top of that state rebates, the CVRP as well as the PG&E rebate. That gets it down to $19,500, which is about 48% off the original MSRP. It's a pretty good deal. It's more drastic on the Nissan Leaf. There you can get down to about 62% off MSRP by the time you take into consideration all of the state rebates.
Can we just take this in for a moment?
Yes, take that in.
That's enormous.
It is enormous.
I mean, across all the three sets of columns you have there.
It gets a little less aggressive for the public agencies as well as our remaining
Oh yeah, only a third off in the last
Only
column.
a third. Yeah, it varies from, I think, a low of 33% to a high of 52% for the remaining community. It is a little less, though, because obviously Monterey Bay Community Power provides a smaller incentive for those two categories. And the state rebate, the CBRP, is a little less for those two categories. But it's still a pretty significant discount. That also doesn't consider all of the annual savings for driving an EV, right? The fuel and maintenance. Are there any questions, or should I flip to the next page?
You can go to the next page, but we do have a question. Is your microphone on? Thank you.
Is that buying or leasing?
This one's leasing. I'll show you buying next.
Okay.
So are you available to negotiate individuals' behalves as well?
This worked out pretty well. I have to remind you that the process was what built this in for us. We issued an RFP to every dealer in the Tri-County. So we tried to create a very competitive environment. And that's why you're seeing some of these drastic discounts.
And going back to your map for just a second, you're still waiting to hear from these other dots on this map. Okay, thank you.
Yes. I would love to have one dealer per manufacturer. We did learn today that we will definitely not have the Model 3 Tesla, which I was hoping, because that's at $35,000. But we just couldn't figure out the logistics with Tesla. We tried. Everybody tried really hard, but not this year. Interestingly, the purchase is still a good deal, but it's not quite as aggressive as the lease. You'll notice that the dealer discounts and the manufacturer discounts aren't as drastic. Obviously, the rebates that you get from the state are the same. The incentives you get from Monterey Bay Community Power are the same. But in this case, the most aggressive discount off MSRP will be about 41%. The leased is about 36%. Still a pretty good deal off MSRP. I'm just going to keep moving on unless I have some questions. Okay. I did want to talk about how we are going to reach folks here. We have the traditional media, print, radio, and digital lined up. There's also community events, and there's ride and drive events, all to reach these communities. That's kind of from an advertising standpoint. This chart just shows how we're going to reach the customer segments from a customer perspective. How are we going to reach what we're calling underserved through nonprofits, social services, ag outreach, and schools. Our nonprofits we can reach through our community foundations and healthcare. So I won't go through all of these, but my point is that we are definitely targeting each of those customer segments to try and reach them. I also want to point out that when the new website is live, there's some amazing educational tools, interactive tools, specifically targeted on EVs that are terrific. They can walk you through the different car models, the savings, greenhouse gas savings, even walk you through charging, how does that work, where do you go? It's some really terrific tools.
Could we get a notice on when the new website goes live so we can all try it out?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to go on to the next topic, which is EV infrastructure building codes. I was going to do this big pitch on why they're so important, but clearly you guys have it. My point was that obviously we can't have EV adoption unless we have charging stations, and we know we can't get charging stations unless we somehow reduce the cost of purchasing and installing them, but also the other missing piece is adopting building codes. I won't go through all the reasons that Ed just discussed, but we hear you. We are working very hard on getting a scope finalized as well as terms and agreements for a contract. We're moving forward. I'd like to give a Cal EVIP update. And first, a quick refresher. I know it's been a while since we've talked about this. If you'll recall, back in early April, Monterey Bay Community Power sent a letter of interest to the California Energy Commission, the CEC, with basically the message is, we will work with you to help structure a charging station program that will meet the needs of our community. We will do marketing to do outreach to make sure they know about this program. And we will commit $1 million in our fiscal year 1920 to support that program. About a month later, the CEC came back with an award for the Tri-County of $6 million. And the purpose of that $6 million was to reduce the cost of charging station equipment as well as the cost to install that equipment, all with the goal of increasing charging access for our community to drive EV adoption. So we got this award. Staff took a wait-and-see approach. We were one of the first territories, the first geographies awarded through the Cal EVIP program. So we wanted to learn the successes or the concerns around some of the other programs that had been implemented before us. We also wanted to make sure we really understood what our customers wanted through this program. So in a nutshell, we really wanted to ensure our money was well spent. So we put a lot of time into it. We have worked very closely with CEC and the program administrator, CSE, to work through how we can possibly meet our customers' needs as well as their needs. We've had two pretty big moves forward. We now have the CEC agreeing to have Cal EVIP cover any kind of public works project that has the sidewalk ripped up, the street ripped up, and they just want to stub out but not necessarily install charging stations. Cal EVIP will now cover that. Cal EVIP will also cover new and renovated buildings. Again, stub outs, not necessarily charging stations. So that's a big move and a big success for us. We're also negotiating we're asking for more lenient disadvantaged community eligibility requirements. And that's very significant because it will allow more funding to go to a broader area, in particular some of the areas where we know our most impoverished community lives. So if we can get charging stations, which, by the way, if you look at a map of Monterey Bay Community Power and you overlay that with where some of the highest poverty levels are, you will see a dearth of charging stations. There's nothing there. So if we can get charging stations in that area, at the same time those bolts are coming off lease, I really think that we can finally provide access to those communities that you were referring to. What I did also learn through this whole process is, if you'll recall, the CEC did a needs assessment for the Tri-County that showed that to meet the EV adoption goals set by the state, we would have to invest about $16 million in charging stations. And what I realized going through this process is the CEC is giving us $6 million, which is a great start, but it's not going to meet all of our customers' needs. So we were trying to support our public agencies. We knew our small business was really focused on site assessments. Those needs were not going to be able to meet this first go around. But what I can say is MBARD has an amazing program that meets very different needs than what Cal EVIP is addressing. We know the VW settlement is rolling out, which has an element of 100% funding for public agencies. So I think there's a lot of other ways that we're going to be able to address some of those needs, but initially it's not going to be through Cal EVIP. Here's kind of a update of where we are from a timing standpoint. The goal is to sign the agreement with CSE, who is the program administrator, in May. The program would launch in early August. That's a slip of a couple weeks. I wanted to share what kind of discount people will see through these charging stations for a level 2. If you're a commercial installer, you're going to see about a 75% cost covered for both the equipment as well as the installation. That's pretty rich. There's also going to be additional incentives for our disadvantaged community as well as multi-unit dwellings, so apartment complexes. For the level 3s or DC fast chargers, this average worries me a little bit because there's such a variation with both the equipment for DC fast chargers as well as site installations. But on average, they're showing that the incentives are covering about 50 to 75% of the cost as well as the installation. And that will also have discounts for disadvantaged community. All taken in whole, when you take the $6 million from the CEC and you add to that the $1 million from Monterey Bay Community Power, we're expecting about an additional 600 level 2s and another 60 DC fast chargers. That's not bad.
Ms. Trenchard, back up to the level 3s. This is a significant savings. I just heard a presentation this morning by EVgo, and they're nationwide. They've got like over 1,100 of these level 3s in place, and I was talking to the senior vice president who's managing all of this, and she says they're going to install many more in California. Are any of these in conjunction with EVgo or other companies, or are these all on our own that we're doing this? And I guess I'm asking, are we partnering?
EVgo can't wait to get a hold of the Cali VIP funding. What they do is Cali VIP will come in and identify the site hosts and then sign up for the funding and walk the site host through the process. EVgo, ChargePoint, all the vendors are very big players in Cali VIP.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's the source of the money at the state?
It's through the California Energy Commission. I think it's through...
Public benefit funds?
Yeah.
The CEC gets a considerable amount of that funding from the public benefit funds rates that we all pay.
Oh, okay.
It's a charge on the utility bill.
Yeah. Who's the administrator?
CSE.
CSE.
Yeah, they're the
Center for Sustainable Energy.
Ah,
very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
You get extra points when you remember the acronym.
Do you mind if I?
Oh, please. I'm sorry. I'm just missed it, excuse me.
Sorry for interrupting. Is any money going towards subscription fees for the charging stations? And is there any, are you thinking about collecting data at all about usage and such? Is that going to be a requirement of the installation?
On the usage front, that's a really interesting question, because on the usage front, the vending companies, especially the commercial vending companies, keep a pretty tight handle on that because of some of the, LCFS credits, the low carbon fuel standard credits. So I don't expect to have a lot of access to that. Even working with ChargePoint, trying to get information for our own Tri-County was not easy. So no, I don't expect that. Well, you were asking about a subscription. Are you asking about the ownership model that ChargePoint has?
Sure. I guess. Okay. So maybe that's a better question. Then, what is the model? Who's going to be owning the stations?
There's a couple different models. EVgo, for instance, is 100% ownership on the DC fast charger. Level 2 through MBARD is also owning some of the charging stations. They'd prefer not to. ChargePoint is also offering a level 2 model where they'll own it with a fee for maintenance and ongoing operations. So you're going to see a lot of different models through Cali VIP.
Councilmember Hartman, we'll be able to have all the data because there's a good chance they all are our customers. So we should be able to get some good data points on that.
But are you after the usage or the availability of the equipment? What are you interested in?
Well, I'm sure Councilmember Steven would appreciate this, but just to track usage and stuff and see are they being utilized or not? Is it a good location? I mean, I guess it seems like the goal of the program, right, is to get them in the ground, and maybe that's the most important factor for you. But I think looking at the data behind it is always helpful. Especially later on when you're trying to convince to get more money that you can prove what it is you've seen out there.
One of the benefits of CSC is they do a pretty awesome final report. So we'll just include utilization as one of the metrics. So I like that a lot.
I would say for all the ones that we've installed, we get really good usage data. and we can see how many kilowatt hours have been used, how many people have, we don't get any other information like personal data, but we can, like right now, we know how many people have visited the new station we opened up in Prunedale. So we get that data, and we can make some, make use of that data moving forward as far as where we want to put other charging stations, that sort of thing. So we definitely can get that.
Well, we have a couple of comments. Mr. Osmer, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to a large percentage of these going in front of laundromats, in which case it might be a while before you get any usage. But I think that's what we need to look at when we're going forward, is that we've got to put the infrastructure in for other demographics as we go forward, and that leads to better electric vehicle dispersion.
What a great idea, laundromats.
If you build it, they will come. Is there any limit on how much the vendors can charge for charging once they get a subsidy through the program?
I don't believe there are controls on that. I can check, but I don't think so.
It seems like something we might want to think about. I mean, I don't know if that's a problem, how much that varies out in the market. Also wonder if we're considering, at this stage of the game, incorporating any vehicle-to-grid or smart charging technology so that we're ready. I mean, it seems like we should be moving as quickly as we can toward that.
Lots of research on that. I don't know of anybody yet.
I think Sonoma is doing that. They have a pilot program.
They have a
anyway.
pilot, yeah.
Really? For home charging?
No, this is, I believe that's, I'm not sure. I think it might be for home charging
Yeah, I think so.
or business charging, yeah. You know, like workplace charging.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Please continue.
I think I'm done with Cal EVIP. Are you ready for me to go to the last slide?
I think we are.
Okay. Electrification Strategic Plan. We did issue the RFP in March. We received lots of questions back, and we responded to those. We received back 8 proposals. 6 I would classify or categorize as kind of local consulting groups who have lots of experience, not just with our Tri-County, but also CCAs in general. All but 1 came within the $100,000 requirement, and all but 1 came within the timing requirements. A lot of creative solutions around how to address the timing as well as the data requests. So really impressed with what we received. We've reviewed them all. Next week we're going to spend some time kind of double clicking, asking lots and lots of questions, honing down our selection, and selecting a final consultant next Friday.
Good. Sounds promising.
That's all I have.
Good. Mr. Osmer.
Sorry, I'm a little slow. Could you go back to the first one on the solar installations?
Project Sunshine, my favorite.
Yeah. So within these installations, is there any requirement for any other energy efficiency assessments or evaluation of the home?
Well, Grid Alternatives does that, but I don't think it's a requirement for the solar.
Yeah, and it is Grid Alternatives that's delivering.
Yes.
And that's an important distinction, and I think it's one place where I even didn't think about it when I saw this, but it's just the program is a matter of going in and putting in solar. Mm-hmm. No matter what other kind of waste is going on from the roof down, that's the program. And Grid Alternatives actually has excelled in this. They actually got themselves written out of the law at a point when they did the low-income solar at the state. They actually put a requirement that it didn't have to be done into the law.
Okay.
So that's an example of expanding what an existing widely acceptable program is that we can improve on as we do it locally.
So we need to get together to figure out how to combine the two programs to put those energy efficiency requirements in place before the solar goes up.
Yes, at some point, it's a requirement. In other programs, it is a requirement. There's an assessment that's required for regular solar, so.
Thank you.
It's subsidized.
I had some questions about the EV program, and I've got a few of them, so I'll try to, some of them could be short answers. Did you look at the difference between the discounts that were offered by the dealers and what, you can go online and find out what cars are actually selling for in the market in a local area? Did you see a difference? Did you see those bid prices coming in lower than the market prices?
In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. And I think what we learned from Sonoma's experience is that what they publish is not necessarily, at the end of the day, what they offer. So just like we will only have select dealers that offer these programs and receive these incentives, and yet Sonoma discovered that dealers who were not participating in the program actually matched or beat that price. So my point being that dealers are going to deal.
And on the lease pricing, there's a new price at the bottom row that gives the bottom line after all of the discounts.
Yes.
Is that essentially, when you lease a car, my understanding from having done it once is that you essentially get a negotiated price for the car, and then they figure your monthly lease price off of that price. Is that essentially what that bottom row of numbers is?
No, it's the time of lease number would be what would be negotiated for the monthly payment. And then after the fact, after they've acquired their car, then they apply for the CVRP and PG&E rebates.
Right, but the time of lease, that is the number that
Yes.
they're. So the extremely low price on the leasing page for the Nissan Leaf, is that actually the longer 220
No,
mile?
that's the 125 mile.
Yeah, it looked like it was awfully low for that. I mean, are they basically subsidizing that lease so that there's not a big residual at the end of the lease? I mean, it looks like that's the case because the $17,000 price is really low also.
I can't say. I do know that the manufacturers who provide financing really benefit from having their cars leased rather than purchased. So that's part of it. Also, when they offer the financing, they own the title, so they can pass through some of the tax credits back to the customer through the lease. And that's part of what you're seeing.
And the tax credit on the Nissan is still the full $7,500, isn't it?
That's correct.
For now, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And any unspent funds after our initial 4-month period, will those roll over into next year's budget for EVs? Is
Yes,
that
3 months, but yes.
Okay, the intention at this point. I think that's it. Thank you.
That's it.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Let's open it up to the public. We're commenting on the item 11, an update on MBCP programs.
Michael Saint, once again, great job by Beth, as usual. This is amazing numbers. The only thing I don't see, and I'll apologize right now, is I don't see anything for the disadvantaged communities up here for cars. My primary concern, maybe for next year, if money rolls over and some's added in, but you could basically, with these numbers of the discounts, the MBC incentives and stuff, and then counting CVRP and PG&E, you can actually buy them a car. You know, and there's actually 4 that are on the market now in a used instance. You've got the Nissan, which we were working with initially, but they were saying the battery was an issue. But if you were to go out and buy something like a 2013 through 15 Nissan Leaf, you could actually refurbish it for them through Nissan for $2,900.
What do you mean by refurbish?
Well, it's a refurbished battery. It's about $2,900. If you get a newer one, they're going to go all the way up to $6,000. So they'd have a nice car what you actually purchased for them. And you could probably even throw in a charger at the same time. The other cars are the Chevy Spark. All these are under $10,000. I think that's what should be concentrated for the disadvantaged communities maybe next year. And you've also got the Chevy Volts that have come off lease for the last 3 or 4 years. There's hundreds, 200 or 300 of those constantly on the market. Those which are good about, and also the Fiat 500e. And 3 of those are active cooling, so they don't have the battery issue as much as the Nissan Leaf. So that's just one of my comments. Also on the Cal EV VIP program for the chargers, just my opinion, I think it's the ratio 600 to 60 is quite extreme. I think I was talking to Councilman Hartman before that, and he said part of that issue is probably delivering enough of the amperage to do the level 3s, or quite a few of them. But my question there is, how is Tesla doing it? They're actually doing level 4, which is, 100, 150 amp chargers, and are allowed, they are getting the supply. So I thought maybe if anybody knows why the difference. And I think the level 2s within about 3 to 5 years, the range picking up on all these EVs are going to be obsolete. And it's just my opinion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Regarding charging of our EVs, I know Tesla has been operating it as a break-even operation, but I think now they've raised the prices a little more so that they're going to actually be making a reasonable return on superchargers, which is as it should be, so that the world could use a lot more superchargers. But what you said about
would you speak into the microphone, please?
Yes. Well, what was said about EVgo having a large number of charging stations installed across the country, the question is, that would imply that they are either making money at this point, or they expect to make money in the near future. Do you know about anything about that?
So, if you wish to answer, go right ahead, Ms. Chenchin.
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer, but I can say the person I spoke to said they're betting on the come.
Yeah.
They're not making money yet.
So this is a time to comment on the agenda item, not to ask questions of staff, because you can certainly do that after the meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was questions or comments. Okay.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Trenchert, thank you very much. I think this is extraordinary information. We appreciate the update very much. And I think there's some good comments that we've received here. So we're down to item 12, informational item. This is CAC member report and comments. Would any of you wish to make a comment or a report today? Mr. Kaplan.
Just very briefly, I wanted to invite the members of the council and the public to the APAL Climate Action Team's 2nd annual electric car show in Aromas, downtown Aromas, which is easy to find. May 29th from 5 to 8 p.m. There'll be a whole lot of electric car owners there that you can ask questions to. So if you have friends who are interested in maybe buying an electric car, send them that way. And this
Did you
is
say when it was? Did you say? Did I miss it? Did you
It's
say?
May 29th. That's a Wednesday, from 5 to 8 p.m. And I also just wanted to briefly say this is kind of a birthday for me. I'm a NEM customer, so I wasn't enrolled back in July, but today is my enrollment date.
Mr. Stedman.
Yes, along the EV lines, I just wanted to let the council know that we're helping to coordinate, along with Monterey Bay Community Power, a EV test drive as part of Seaside Sustainability Fair on April 28th from 10 to 4. Monterey Bay Electric Vehicle Association and Ecology Action will be putting that on. And then Alan Romero, who you saw tonight, will be leading a discussion with EV drivers and having a really nice talk about what it's like to have an EV and some of the advantages and so forth. So if you can make it down, it's going to be a great fair, and we're right next to all the dealerships. So we hope they will be participating and fully supporting this event as well.
Would be great if we could receive information about that kind of event per email. You know, like that is interesting for all of us.
Good. Good. Yes, that's the proper way. Any other comments? I just have a couple of newsy items I'd just like to make you aware of. And one is, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this, but it's been many, many months ago. If you're interested, LEAN, I believe it's Local Energy Advocacy Network, something like that, LEAN Energy, does a monthly information call on CCAs. So it's very easy to sign up if you're interested. They really do keep it to 1 hour, and you get a sense of what some of the other CCAs are doing.
What's the name?
LEAN Energy, Lean Energy. If you just type that in, you'll find the website. You can get the notices for their monthlies, and I think you might find that interesting. I probably shouldn't be the one reminding you, but I put it on my reminder list. I think we all have to, unless I'm the only one, complete ethics training online by July 10th. Is that right? Ms. Lair, thank you. But you can comment. Go right ahead.
I believe you have up to a year to complete it.
So
I'm looking at Rob. I
not
think
till
that's
2020?
well, but don't wait.
Okay.
Because you are because you are now receiving a stipend, and that's part of the reason why.
Okay. And that was all I was going to report. The next meeting will be here at 6 p.m. on May 16th. I'd like to thank everyone, all the members of the public here and the staff. I guess we should hold meetings every month because we seem to have the need to talk. And so it's been a very good meeting, a lot of good comments. I really value each of you. It looks like Mr. Capron
I
was.
just wanted to ask, you had mentioned an event coming up at Stanford to me that you were going to maybe share with the group.
Oh, if you're interested in it, I will be glad to send this through Ms. Lair. I'm involved in organizing, it's a Silicon Valley Energy Summit, but we talk about a lot of things that might be of interest to you. I've got a panel on community choice aggregation, the PG&E bankruptcy, and a couple other topics. It's all-day Friday on June 21, and if you're interested, before you register, let me know. I'll get you a good rate. So thank you, Mr. Capron. So I was that close to adjourning. I think it's time to do that. Thank you all very much.
I was thinking